Chapter 708. I'm so stupid. I'm so stupid. I'm so stupid. The female's sharp voice played back and forth. This special ringtone made everyone in the bar raise their eyebrows. A nightclub man had been staring at his target for a long time. He was just about to make a move when his outstretched hand froze in midair. At this time, the half-drunk woman lying on the bar raised her eyelids and raised her hand. Her wristband sensed the gesture and automatically connected. Hello? Oh, Secretary He. A voice that was extremely similar to a ringtone rang out. Because she was sleepy, the voice was a bit hoarse. It's private time right now. I've turned off the internet. Where is he? How would I know? In any case, he's not in my bed. Ruewan? That little girl loves to play hide and seek the most. You count to 10 and then call out. Maybe she'll jump out. Tieske, you're really annoying. Cat Eyes struggled to sit up from the bar and shook her head. She shook her head to get rid of the wine in front of her eyes. She grabbed the half-empty glass of wine next to her and splashed it on the face of the scheming nightclub man. Amidst a mix of panicked cries and excited screams, she supported herself on the bar and stood up. She clearly had the appearance of a drunken cat that could fall to the ground at any time, but she slapped the nightclub man, who wanted to get back at her, to the ground. Then she swayed her steps and walked out amidst gazes of astonishment, admiration, yearning, and greed. The call was already disconnected. Cat Eyes was annoyed. Why did they come to find me when they couldn't find him? Could it be that the abnormal relationship between the two of them was completely exposed? That Secretary He, if she really wanted that Luo guy, then she should learn from her and develop an abnormal relationship. Cat Eyes had similar thoughts. She was more active when she drank. Outside the bar, she felt the cool breeze of late spring. Cat Eyes was more or less completely awake. Hiyuan still had some bureaucratic ability to be muddle-headed. She would often turn a blind eye to Luo Nan's behavior that went beyond common sense. It could be considered indulgence, but it could also be considered respect. But once she really did go by the book, then it proved that Luo Nan had stirred up trouble. At the very least, he was highly suspicious. It had only been a few days of peace. Cat Eyes let out a long sigh of relief. Just as she was about to communicate with her boss through the sealed system network, the other side sent back a message wave ahead of her. Speak of the devil. Emergency. Luo Nan's consciousness really did appear to be quite urgent. He even asked a question that Cat Eyes found to be quite high level, but it was also an extremely suspicious question. Aside from the intranet of the inner world, are there any other convenient and secretive transaction models? I'm talking about global networking, the kind that's very common. Where are you? Cat Eyes' words hit the nail on the head. She also revealed the latest news in a rather exaggerated manner. In order to find you, Secretary He almost plowed through Xia City. The person on the other end was silent for 2 seconds before replying, Spring City. Cat Eyes' already bright pupils dilated a little. She was truly interested. She simply sat on the curb of the road. Her long legs, which seemed to glow like a man's, were spread open. Even though she was covered by shorts, she still wantonly attracted the attention of the opposite sex and even the same sex around her. Tell me in detail. If you don't explain the situation, how am I supposed to know what you're up to? Aya. What's there to hesitate about? I won't laugh at you. A minute later, this bold and gloomy girl burst into laughter as if no one was around. She nearly fell backwards. Her sharp laughter painted the scene she had created with her own hands. It painted an even brighter color. It scared away a few people, but it attracted even more people. Cat Eyes turned a blind eye to this. She just laughed at the boss who dominated her life to her heart's content. Oh my God. Why do you have to be so stubborn as to crash into a specialty store? There are so many on the streets. Fine. There are a few professional off-road cars, but aren't your eyes and ears the most well-informed? It's just a trifling Spring City. You've gone through the Civ-style Earthwheel twice. Are you afraid that you won't be able to find a suitable car? The person on the other end was silent for a moment. Finally, a shout was heard. Isn't that just stealing? How can I do that kind of thing? This shout was not so much a rejection of morality. It was better to say that it was a shameful anger that came from a brain turning a corner. Cat Eyes grinned. Wait a minute. Let me look at the news. TSK Disket. Spring City's central business district. Over 20 minutes of power outage. This kind of loss should be in the tens of millions. You've just burned someone's tens of millions, and now you're even arguing about a car. Boss, your way of thinking is truly rare in the world. I'm impressed. How can accident and intentional compare? The voice on the other end gradually weakened. It was obvious that he couldn't find a more convincing reason. At this time, Cat Eyes took a step back. Fine. After all, this is an atypical situation. But are you sure you don't want to use a quick and convenient method? Of course. The bitter taste of reaping the fruits of one's own actions seemed to seep in from 2,000 kilometers away. Cat Eyes laughed in satisfaction at this, but she didn't want to go too far. In the end, a lawful boy was better than a chaotic boss. She thought about how a certain person had a bag full of money but couldn't spend it. His methods were wrapped in a cocoon of his own making. He was all alone 2,000 kilometers away. It was quite pitiful. So, she generously offered a solution. Isn't it easy to spend the money? I'll send you an app. You install it on your wristband. I don't need to say more about the security measures. You can't do anything else, but you can still use it temporarily. The other side also felt relieved. He thanked her over and over, completely lacking the demeanor of a boss. Unfortunately, there were strict and even harsh restrictions on the authority of the closed system. Such an intense contrast made it hard for the dark clouds in the bottom of Cat Eyes' heart to be blown open, scattering the radiance of delight. The wristband rang again. I'm so stupid. I'm so stupid. I'm so stupid. The corner of Cat Eyes' mouth twitched. In the end, she still accepted the call with a slight arc, seeing how the other side called out, Sister Cat Eyes, several times. I'll give you a cover. While Cat Eyes was weaving her web of lies, Luo Nan had just finished downloading the app through the link provided by Cat Eyes in Xia City 2,000 kilometers away. Cat Eyes reminded him that he needed to take proper security measures. Luo Nan was even more ruthless. He directly downloaded the app onto his external neuron, the virtual brain system. Let's see what can trick him this time. The name of the app was very straightforward. It was called Transaction. The first interface that opened after installation was a three-dimensional map of the world. Hundreds and thousands of dots of light were scattered across the map like scattered stars. They were distributed in various locations around the world. Looking carefully, Luo Nan discovered that these dots of light were not only located in the world's 88 large metropolitan areas, but they were also scattered throughout the vast non-urban areas. Cat Eyes didn't explain too much to him, but the novice guide built into the app was quite humane. Luo Nan soon realized that each of these thousands of dots of light was a hidden transaction location. The foundation of their existence was the vagabond tribes that were inharmonious with the modern metropolis civilization. They were located in every corner of the world. That's right. These transaction locations were established by vagabonds of the wilderness. They followed the migration of the vagabond tribes and moved without end. The transaction locations represented by each dot of light weren't necessarily accurate. They were constantly changing. They were reflected on the app, and they weren't refreshed in real time. However, with the implementation of the Vagabond Act in recent years, large amounts of vagabonds returned to the cities. Many of the tribe's transaction locations entered the cities as well. Their existence was reasonable. Their existence was demand. These flea markets, that were completely separated from the social network of authority, had their own value to vagabonds, to ability users, and to certain people who sought convenience. They were able to survive within the cracks of policy and human relations. They had a far more stable environment than the wilderness. The app showed that there were 2 vagabond transaction locations in Spring City alone. There was a brief description of the goods and information. Online shopping didn't exist here. Only face-to-face transactions were possible. Due to the special nature of the transaction locations, the barter model was a bit more popular. If one wanted to use credits or honor points, one would have to pay a rather heart-wrenching commission fee. Luo Nan first confirmed the goods and then looked at the distance. He finally chose the U-Hole market that was about 40 kilometers away from the CBD. This was the closest one. He still needed to check the bus routes. Wait a minute. If he didn't want to leave behind any traces and maintain his moral standards, then this method wouldn't do. Hiss! Luo Nan raised his head to look at the night sky that was once again obscured by light pollution. He suddenly felt that it would be quite good to burn off a few tens of millions. Luo Nan had recently been learning stealth and rapid movement techniques from Red Fox. He hadn't given up on the cultivation of the 9 orifices 6 roots technique. His physical fitness was still steadily increasing. However, running a marathon that was twice as fast as the world record was still tiring. And this was the plateau. It was already midnight in Spring City when Luo Nan entered the recycling stratum of Spring City while panting slightly according to the route indicated by the app. The sound of his panting was exceptionally clear in the silent and dark alleys of the building. It attracted the gazes of many people in the shadows. It was said that the 88 large metropolitan circles were all the work of copy and paste. Then the copy wasn't just the bright side. There were also the shadowy areas of the recycling stratum that the sunlight couldn't reach. Compared to the bustling business district, the recycling stratum of any city couldn't be put on the table. Even though they were only a fine line away from bustling. This evoked a few hazy memories in Luo Nan's mind. He had come to a similar place when he was in Xia City. Back then he was still a crow. Cough. Actually, his soul was attached to Ink's body. He and Cragburst had turned that area upside down. It was also there that he had rescued Ruiwen. Speaking of which, gangsters seemed to really like the Beast faction's off-road vehicles. If someone were to jump out and yell, "Robbery," wouldn't he be able to immediately kill them? No, snatch them back? This didn't violate basic morality. And it was much more convenient than going to some market or exchange. Luo Nan really did have a bit of expectation when his thoughts reached this point. But Luo Nan was soon disappointed. The sensor network in front of him fully displayed the surrounding geographical environment of the U-Hole market. It was different from the remains of the highway in Xia City that connected the inner and outer parts of the city. What ran through most of the lower stratum was an underground river that gradually meandered into the ground. Chapter 709. Since Luo Nan was unable to take shortcuts, the so-called robbery and counter-robbery became dull and uninteresting. However, there were some people hidden in the shadowy corners. They held a deep interest in a target who was walking alone in a narrow alley near midnight. There were more than one greedy gaze that roamed Luo Nan's body in an attempt to find traces of luxury goods. There were also some people who had purer inclinations towards happiness. It was a long night. Finding a random person to pass the time was good. Of course, there were even more people who had completely indifferent attitudes towards the people and matters in the corners of the alleys. They shut their doors and windows and went to sleep, saving energy for tomorrow's livelihood. Or they tossed and turned in their own little world. This was the recycling stratum. Low-income people, vagrants, gangs, vagabonds. In short, they were people who had yet to adapt to this society. They injected chaotic emotions and colors into this area. In terms of spectrum, it wasn't to the point of despair, but it was quite far from normal. Emotions and desires were directly visible in Luo Nan's eyes, but he didn't believe that comprehending the mysteries within was an easy matter. If he were to make an inappropriate analogy, it would be like an electromagnetic wave. Visible light was only a small and insignificant part of its long spectrum. There were far too many other deadly things hidden deep within the indescribable layers. Luo Nan was just like the brilliant sunwheel that was rolling within the abyss. Even though it was separated by an endless distance of space and time, it transmitted a tiny bit of heat. The divine ability it created made Luo Nan feel deep fear and reverence. Every time Luo Nan tried to understand it, he would always have the painful experience of drawing fire to his body. Even his body and mind would be out of balance for a few days. After a few times, his entire body was on the verge of collapse. In comparison, the ice-cold virtual brain system seemed much more amiable. In recent months, Luo Nan had devoted himself to the preparatory work of planning his hunt in the clouds. It had been a long time since he had taken the initiative to warm himself. Tonight, he was affected by the emotional atmosphere of the recycling stratum. His telepathic thoughts drifted over and was unexpectedly scorched. His mind was a bit gloomy. He didn't have the mood to play the game of snatching and counter-snatching. He simply released a bit of mental oppression. It didn't have much lethality, but it was enough to make the brains of the people around him feel as if they were being pricked by needles. Whoever had more evil thoughts would suffer a more miserable backlash. Luo Nan had been roasted by the abyssal sun wheel for several months, but it wasn't as if Luo Nan hadn't gained anything at all. He learned these little tricks without having to learn them. Soon, a series of groans came from the darkness. The floating malice was like a mosquito that had been sprayed with medicine. It hummed and scattered in all directions. After that, the surroundings became completely quiet. Those who were able to stand guard outside the Vagrant Exchange knew how to behave, even if they were gangsters. With so many aptitude users entering and exiting, even if there was only 1% or 1,000 chance of conflict, it would be enough to beat this group of people into submission like dogs. Luo Nan was able to easily arrive at the pier that led to the U-Hole market, the main entrance. The entrance that connected the mortal world, the inner world, and the underground black market was placed in this not-so-remote location. There would certainly be some concealment. What appeared on the outside was a sealed-off factory area. It was currently in a state of desolation. Luo Nan didn't know what it used to be. It looked like it was riddled with holes, and even the main entrance was covered in rust. In fact, it was sealed quite tightly. It was hard to get a full view of it from the densely packed high-rise buildings in the surroundings. Luo Nan followed the instructions on the app and found the verification switch on the dirty main entrance. He entered the verification code, but the main entrance didn't move. Instead, a small door to the side opened. After entering the factory area, there was a wide two-way, 6-lane road in front of Luo Nan. It led directly to the pier. The markings on the road had long since been ground down, but the road was still smooth as a whole. It was probably a remnant of the factory's early days. Behind the main entrance were a dozen or so old electric scooters. They could be considered a means of transportation. There was quite a bit of distance between the main entrance of the factory area and the pier. Luo Nan didn't pay attention to them. He sized up the place with a few glances. He saw an armed robot guard that had just entered standby mode in the guard room to the side of the main entrance. Opposite the guard room was a disguise room. Well, even though the shop was quite cold and cheerless, the service was quite meticulous. Disguises and modifications were a must if Luo Nan wanted to achieve a perfect crime. Right now Luo Nan's face was smeared with Red Fox's secret color-changing ointment. He appeared quite a bit older than his actual age, but it was just a simple disguise. It was hard for others to notice any flaws in his movements that were as fast as thunder. There were certainly not enough people in a place like this where there were too many eyes. Luo Nan didn't hesitate. He directly entered the disguise room. The door guard room was just the entrance. The true disguise room was deep underground. It could be considered a completely different world. There were many dressing rooms arranged inside the disguise room. It looked like it could accommodate a dozen or 20 people changing their appearances at the same time. This didn't seem like a black market. It seemed more like the backstage of a small theater. Luo Nan was half fumbling and half looking for fun. He followed the guidance of the AI housekeeper in the disguise room and picked a dressing room to enter. He touched here and looked there. He looked at the hundreds of different disguise techniques. Many of them were fully operated by AI. They didn't require any human intervention. It could be considered an eye-opener. However, Luo Nan didn't play any fancy tricks according to Cat Eye's instructions. He just chose the simplest and crudest method of wearing a mask and a cloak. He spent more of his energy on another set of equipment. Aside from changing his appearance, the dressing room also had a credit exchange facility. Traders who came to the black market could exchange credit points from the secular world and honor points from the inner world for black market currency. It was said to be quite safe, but Cat Eyes didn't recommend it. This was because the exchange facility had an excellent credit system attached to it. These were Cat Eye's words. Luo Nan held on to his curiosity and abandoned the currency exchange function of the system interface. He chose the credit rating to the side. According to Cat Eyes, one could obtain a credit loan through this credit rating. To be more precise, it was a free startup fund for professionals. The system required the trader to display their professional skills and use their ability level to exchange for a certain amount of money. This money was purely a gift. It was anonymous and didn't need to be repaid. There were no traces to speak of. Praise the Bolu who was willing to burn money. The system interface began to display basic options. Fleshly side. Mental side. Of course, Luo Nan chose the fleshly side. He had to disguise himself. The system clearly didn't possess the ability to distinguish between lies and lies. It easily let him pass. Next, it asked about professional skills. Luo Nan chose the mechanical design, processing, and assembly column from the long list. He had learned the basics of engineering from Worker Zhai over the past half a year. He had also learned how to assemble, modify, and operate the exoskeleton platform. He also had the support of the virtual brain system. This was indeed the skill he could bring out the most in the secular world. According to Worker Zhai's evaluation, being an engineer in their maintenance center was more than enough. The system seemed to place a bit more emphasis on professional skills. A new window immediately popped up after Luo Nan made his choice. The new window was actually a virtual work area. It displayed a perspective view of an oil pressure servo system that had been damaged by an external impact. There was even a set of virtual tools lined up next to it. What Luo Nan needed to do was to eliminate the malfunction, repair the damage, and let the servo system operate once again under a limited set of tools and time. You still use oil pressure? Such an ancient design? Luo Nan should rejoice. Worker Zhai's teaching style was more traditional, and his foundation was quite solid. He could still solve this problem. He picked a suitable option on the toolbar and was about to start when he suddenly realized something. Wait a minute. Didn't I just want to buy an off-road motorcycle? Why is it that long-distance running, disguise, and problem-solving are getting more and more complicated? He rubbed his head, only to touch the cloak he had just put on. This made Luo Nan chuckle. Who cares? He had nothing to do anyway. Instead of going back to sleep early, wouldn't it be better to go to the legendary black market and broaden his horizons? He tossed aside his distracting thoughts and concentrated on solving the problem. He quickly solved it. But after this checkpoint, what followed was no laughing matter. A series of professional questions popped up in the virtual work area for a period of time. They covered design, maintenance, processing, assembly, and many other aspects. Some were difficult and some were easy. Luo Nan was able to answer some of them with ease. Some of them required him to rack his brain and sweat. Some of them were simply skipped. Just this question bank alone was an extraordinary accumulation of knowledge, not to mention anything else. In particular, there were practically no theoretical questions within. All of them were concrete and detailed examples that were used. The imperial exam required practical experience. In comparison, the knowledge that Worker Zhai imparted was a bit more academic. Fortunately, they had been together for the past few months. They had dismantled various exoskeleton platforms. They had accumulated a large amount of experience. Luo Nan had set up a forward operating base from scratch in the desolate wilderness. He had encountered and solved many problems, so he wasn't blindly scratching his head. Even so, there were some problems that Luo Nan had to refer to the structure of the virtual brain system in order to pass the test. Luo Nan was truly drenched in cold sweat after this round of testing. He hadn't been this nervous even when he faced two teams of Deep Blue Squad at the Energy Center. But this also allowed him to have a more detailed understanding of the flaws in his own knowledge structure. His overall train of thought was clear. When he faced the interface that indicated that the evaluation was complete, he simply wanted to return to the starting interface and refresh again. The current Luo Nan had a whole new level of respect for the Vagrant Exchange. Think about it. It was just mechanical design and processing, yet there was such a rich question bank. There were dozens of categories of various sizes. Wouldn't the scale be even more terrifying when all of them were added together? Luo Nan really wanted to make a copy and bring it back. The disguise and credit evaluation had been completed while Luo Nan was sighing with emotion. Luo Nan looked into the mirror. Inside was a cloaked and masked man. He could tell with a single glance that the man had disguised himself. It was a crude arrangement that said, "I just don't want you to know who I am." The concealment function became more and more effective. Chapter 710. Luo Nan didn't really care about the effects of his disguise right now. His attention was completely drawn away by the professional credit assessment exam. The credit rating system didn't immediately give a result. It just opened a private passage in the dressing room for Luo Nan, indicating that he could leave. At the other end of the passage was an old workshop. The production line inside had already been dismantled. Luo Nan was familiar with the place right now. They were all common testing equipment from the martial arts gym. This was the place to show off his extraordinary power. But Luo Nan's mind was filled with the professional exam results. He didn't have the mood to show off. He just tested his explosive power and displayed a standard that clearly exceeded the limits of ordinary people. This time, the credit system finally responded. The terminal at the entrance of the old workshop displayed, "The credit rating has been completed. Do you want to create a virtual ID?" There were two options. Yes and no. The options were simple, but a large section of explanation popped up when Luo Nan clicked on it. He knew that the problem inside was not simple at all. Choosing yes meant that he had to create a virtual identity on the Vagrant Exchange's intranet. Although it had nothing to do with his true identity, it would still leave a trace. He needed to have a certain amount of trust in the Vagrant Exchange's intranet. Trust my ass. The reason why he stayed up until midnight was because he didn't want to leave any traces in Spring City. Luo Nan was about to choose no, but wait, if he chose no, he would be completely anonymous. The system would give the exchange an anonymous card for transactions. This was a primitive method to erase the traces brought by information technology. But this would lead to a lower credit rating. His startup capital would be reduced to 5% and he wouldn't be able to enjoy the in-depth services and benefits of the Vagrant Exchange. After leaving the exchange, he would have to start all over again. In other words, if he still chose the credit rating, he would have to go through all the evaluations again. Luo Nan slapped his terminal. Trap. It was definitely a trap. He was not annoyed by the 5%. After all, according to the rules, if he chose to be completely anonymous, he could theoretically obtain this startup capital repeatedly. Compared to the one-time overdraft of creating a virtual identity, the former had more restrictions than the latter. Otherwise, no matter how rich the investor was, he would have to be prepared to spend a lot of money after a dozen or so times. Compared to the startup capital restriction, Luo Nan was really annoyed by the order of the interface. If this option was placed at the forefront of the credit system interface, then Luo Nan and the vast majority of people who needed to conceal their identities would absolutely choose to remain anonymous without the slightest hesitation. They wouldn't care about the services and benefits. However, after the intense and exciting exam, just a little bit of anticipation would be greatly discounted. Later on, they would have to abandon their exam results and start all over again. Alright, he was a little reluctant. Luo Nan threw a tantrum at the terminal, but in the end, he was unable to restrain his anticipation towards the real results. He grimaced in pain as he chose yes. His eyes were wide open as he jumped into the trap, but at the same time, he swore to himself, "If my identity is exposed because of this, I will sweep this place clean." The terminal bore Luo Nan's small emotions, but it still maintained its calm. The next interface popped up according to the prescribed order. Please set up a virtual identity ID. Luo Nan thought for a bit and chose the two words, smelting furnace. This could be considered a summary of today's operation. Soon, he took out a simple and unadorned metal plate from the designated toolbox. This was his identity nameplate in the U-Hole market. The nameplate had a built-in chip. It could be read and operated on the terminal of the exchange. This money was bound to the virtual identity account. Not only could it be used in the local market, it could be used in the vast majority of vagrant markets around the world. However, this was tantamount to completely entering the credit system of the Vagrant Exchange. That virtual identity possessed more practical significance. There was always a feeling of giving up halfway. Luo Nan curled his lips and forcefully swallowed the fruit of his emotions. He focused his attention on the evaluation results. The terminal read the nameplate's information and displayed it on the display. Smelting furnace. Fleshly awakened. Intermediate mechanic. Startup capital of 328 points. 328 points? Was this considered a lot or a little? Just as this thought flashed through Luo Nan's mind, the display screen refreshed once more. Professional technical evaluation. 3609 in the mechanical category, top 40%. Overall evaluation, 60,763, top 50%. Startup capital is C file. Note: if you enter the top 500 in the professional evaluation or the top 5,000 in the overall evaluation, you can change your file to B file. The corresponding startup capital will be refunded. Oh my, there was still a follow-up. Luo Nan blinked his eyes at the display screen. On one hand, he wanted to understand the total scale of the Vagrant exchange system and his own position among the professionals. On the other hand, he wanted to gain a deeper understanding of the Burn Money Scout and its tricks. Right now, it seemed that the startup capital itself was quite reliable. This wasn't a one-time deal. There were still upgrades to come. Of course, this was also a method to increase user stickiness. Luo Nan began to comfort himself. Fortunately, he chose to establish a virtual identity. Otherwise, if he followed the standard of 5%, he would be left with less than 20 points. What would he do with it? Buy a midnight snack? It was almost 1 o'clock in the middle of the night. There were very few people who would mess around at this hour in the black market. There was not a second person who entered the entire time. Luo Nan completed his mental adjustment. He stepped on his electric scooter in a carefree and unhurried manner. He rolled over the spacious asphalt road and passed through the spacious and empty factory area. He arrived at the pier a minute later. This place was still empty. There was only a terminal that could be used to swipe a card for verification. Luo Nan operated according to the rules. A sealed small boat floated up from the water's surface a few seconds later. It immediately opened up its cladding, revealing a narrow cabin that could accommodate 2 people at most. The automatic control system display screen at the bow of the boat lit up, displaying the winding route of travel. This was the transportation tool that led to the U-Haul market. Luo Nan boarded the small boat. The small boat started automatically the moment he sat down. It noiselessly tore through the water's surface and moved forward at a pace that was neither too fast nor too slow. Luo Nan sized up the place with curiosity on the way. Sparse and scattered lighting seeped through the gaps between the densely packed stalagmites above his head. It was hazy and carried chaotic ghostly shadows. Luo Nan could still faintly see the mottled colors on the rocks. The U-Haul market was located in the depths of a typical karst cave. The entire structure was divided into sections. There was a clear downward path after traveling several kilometers along the waterway. The buildings in the city grew more and more sparse, and the topography became more and more complex. A portion of the waterway even needed to be submerged in order to pass through. It was because of this that the small boat had a completely sealed cladding. It also needed to be used as a temporary submarine. The karst cave in front of him grew lower and lower. The falling stalagmites were about to hit his head. Luo Nan simply lay down. His gaze lingered on the stalagmites of all shapes and colors. The sensory network that came out ahead had already mapped the general situation of the area within a radius of 20 kilometers in his mind. There were hundreds of karst caves of all sizes. There were hundreds of thousands of stalagmites. The result of the direct reflection was very chaotic. It was like an enormous maze. Luo Nan closed his eyes for a moment. His cerebral cortex and central nervous system operated at high speeds, endlessly integrating the information received by the sensory network. He used the secret technique of overall planning to increase the efficiency of the processing, gradually stripping away the outer layer of the chaotic and useless baggage to form an even clearer roadmap. Well, it was still relatively simple. Luo Nan had been carrying out the reconstruction of the structure of his mental senses for the past few months. The source of power came from the depths of the cloud world, the misty labyrinth that made it difficult for him to move forward. The space-time configuration fragments danced before his eyes all the time like a sandstorm. They were randomly pieced together and combined together. There were even more repulsion and collisions. When faced with the tens of billions of configuration fragments, Luo Nan was unable to grasp the logic of the structure within. He was unable to figure out what kind of laws were there. His soul strength was without a basis. Most mental senses and interference were ineffective. Exploring the mysteries of the depths of the labyrinth was out of the question. Over there, Luo Nan had become blind with his eyes wide open. He could only toss and turn in an area with a radius of a few dozen meters. He slowly piled them up like building blocks, expanding the range. If it weren't for Ruiwen, this little walking stick, 100 or 1,000 Luo Nans would have been lost until the end of their lives. Compared to the misty labyrinth in the clouds, the underground karst cave was far too intimate. Luo Nan only used 10 seconds to draw a concise and clear topographic map in his mind. Whether it was the winding waterway or the isolated and fractured topographic structure, everything was clearly reflected on the map. Next up was a matter of supplementing the details. Speaking of which, if he were to make a rubbing copy of this topographic map and sell it, how much money would it fetch? If he wasn't satisfied, would he want a similar high-definition version of the world map? Luo Nan still didn't have a trusting attitude towards the 328 points of starting capital. His mind revolved with business. The AI within the small boat emitted a warning sound while he was pondering. It warned the passengers that they were about to enter the water. The stalactites above their heads had already fallen down piece by piece. Some of the edges had already pierced into the water surface. The small boat's fully enclosed cladding slid and docked, sealing the already narrow cabin even more tightly. They entered the underwater phase. The lights within the cabin lit up and the oxygen supply system began to operate. Overall, it didn't seem stuffy. Luo Nan blinked and looked at the half-worn paint on the cladding. He thought, next time I come here, I must definitely try the entrance outside the city. That place is much more spacious and convenient. However, it was quite interesting to carry out underwater in this manner. He looked at the waterway topographic map that he had sorted out earlier. It seemed that this was the only way to run through the 4 levels of the U-Hole market. There were over 20 large and small black market areas. Luo Nan pulled up the trade app and looked at the relevant explanation. Sure enough, the U-Hole market was ranked at the top of the hundreds of vagrant exchanges in the world. There was a bit of an adventurous flavor to it. Unfortunately, he was the type that had a map-wide hack. Luo Nan burst out in laughter. The sound of laughter hadn't died away when the small boat suddenly shook. It seemed to have collided with something. A muffled vibration came in and the boat's entire body drifted to the side. Then it collided with the uneven stone wall on the side of the river. This time it was clearly heavier and Luo Nan felt dizzy and disoriented from the jolt. Chapter 7:11. Luo Nan instinctively panicked upon encountering an accident, but he soon calmed down. Basically, the most difficult way for him to die was to be electrocuted to death. The other was to drown to death. Of course, the most miserable way for him to die was to be electrocuted to death or drowned to death. In any case, his mental senses were already focused, and he immediately confirmed that the small boat had encountered a car accident. No, it was a boat accident. The small boat had collided with a stalagmite that had sunk to the bottom of the water. As for why it collided, it was because the stalagmite that had sunk to the bottom of the water had suddenly bounced up when the small boat passed by. The top of the stalagmite had risen, and the small boat's navigation system had made a mistake in its judgment. The small boat was unable to dodge in time. Looking into the cause of the accident, the relatively gentle waterway did not have any strong turbulence in the water. The stalagmite had moved on its own. Could it be that the distortion of the wilderness had caused the stalagmite to become a spirit? Then Luo Nan saw that the front end of the stalagmite and the small boat had already cracked open for some unknown reason. Large amounts of water poured in, and there were flickering electric flames jumping inside. However, the flames were soon extinguished. Luo Nan's mental senses were limited by the precision of his senses. Without the support of special techniques, it was not enough to naturally penetrate the completely sealed opaque barrier. But it was different if a hole was opened. Oh my, this is truly a pleasant surprise. Luo Nan reached out and slapped the cover. Since the outside of the small boat was still underwater, the cover adhered to its own mission under the control of the system. It firmly sealed itself. This was not a problem for Luo Nan. The external neuron poked at the system, and the cover ignored the surging river water and opened on its own. Luo Nan shivered from the shock of the ice-cold river water. However, not a single drop of water seeped in, aside from the transmission of the chill. This was because he had utilized the condensation ring to fully control the water molecules, forming a thin and tough water membrane to protect the effects of his disguise. And so, Luo Nan followed the surging flow of water out of the small boat's cabin. The small boat had already moved forward a few dozen meters crookedly with the flow of water. He still needed to turn back. He hadn't deliberately practiced swimming, but the sensor network built on the foundation of the condensation ring made him very sensitive to the details of the flow of water. Coupled with his outstanding body coordination, he found the feeling after just a few strokes in the water. The water was turbid and dark, but it was as easy as reading lines on his palm. Soon, he came to the side of the damaged stalagmite that was jumping. He gave it a push without any hope at all. Sure enough, even if the inside was hollow, the weight was quite heavy. At the very least, Luo Nan had no way of dragging it away. Luo Nan looked at the glimmer of light that still flickered within the fissure. He said to himself, "It's up to your luck." His soul's strength interfered with the external neuron, forming an interference wave that swept across the control system within the stalagmite. A second later, a crack appeared in the middle of the stalagmite. The water that was supposed to rush in was strangely turned back and churned, as if there was an invisible wall that could not be penetrated. It was under these circumstances that the door on the stalagmite was able to break free from the heavy water pressure for a short period of time. It opened normally, and Luo Nan saw the transparent environment inside. He didn't go in. The door was far too small. Even his immature body of a youth would find it hard to squeeze in. With a slight thought, the water that had been blocked outside the door swirled and surged in. It was like an iron wok in the hands of a chef. It performed a unique skill similar to a flipping ladle. It dipped inside the stalagmite, and when it surged out again, it carried a small human body with it. The human body moved at an appropriate angle, avoiding the damage that might come from the door's collision. Perfect. It was just as Luo Nan's mental senses had predicted. This was a child that was at most 5 or 6 years old. He was about the same age as the little bastard from Worker Jai's family. The child's face was already warped with panic and fear due to the series of unforeseen events. But even so, he still opened his eyes wide, doing his best to distinguish the surrounding environment after the series of unforeseen events. He was very different from his peers who closed their eyes and cried for their mothers. "Let's go!" Luo Nan grabbed the child by the back of his collar and turned around to chase after the small boat that had been washed several hundred meters away by the current. Then he saw the target that had sunk to the bottom of the river full of water, unable to rise again. This really was a sad story. Luo Nan shook his head and turned to look at the little fellow in his hand. Then he saw the pair of eyes that were doing their best to open wide. The premise for the little fellow to be able to do this was that Luo Nan had already used the condensation ring to filter the water, creating a breathing, aerobic environment. Perhaps the little fellow already felt that there was no need to worry about his survival, but he did his best to look over. His panic and fear began to settle, and his brows were still furrowed. He really did look like a precocious boy. If this wasn't the case, it would have been impossible for him to drive a small submarine disguised as a stalagmite through the waterway. In addition, this child's body, tonight was truly an eventful night. At this time, Luo Nan naturally forgot that he was the one who started everything. He was the legendary instigator of all this. Luo Nan walked forward in the waterway for nearly a kilometer before he finally left this section of the underground waterway. Then he found a relatively flat riverbank and climbed up while carrying the little fellow. Illumination appeared once more here, reflecting the blurry outlines of the surrounding karst cave. The U-Hole market paid more attention to the construction of basic facilities, but no matter how much attention they paid, they couldn't withstand the appearance of accidents. "I'll compensate you." Luo Nan still hadn't thought of how to communicate with the precocious boy in his hand, but the boy took the initiative to express his attitude. Other than his voice being a bit shaky, everything else was quite good. After all, he was soaked in water. He wasn't like Luo Nan. His entire body was dry. It was as if he had swum in a fake waterway. Luo Nan blurted out a sentence, "That small boat isn't mine anyways." Crap. He forgot to change his voice. Also, the moves he made earlier seemed to be all on the mental side. Right when Luo Nan suddenly woke up and was vexed, the precocious boy went, "Oh." Then he actually didn't say anything else. Luo Nan turned his head to look curiously. He saw the little boy turn his head to size up the surroundings. Then he raised his right arm to look at the projected virtual screen. A detailed map of the karst cave's waterway was displayed on the screen. His plan to sell the map could be scrapped. Luo Nan sighed soundlessly. He deliberately suppressed his voice and said, "Do you know how to get there?" The little boy raised his head to glance at him. "Cave 47 is surrounded by water." Luo Nan finally understood when he saw the gaze the little boy cast over, so it turns out I'm the one doing it. It was rare for him to meet someone younger than him. Luo Nan wanted to tease the little boy a bit. He imitated the tone of a cold-blooded killer in the movies. In this era, labor costs are the most expensive. Luo Nan's gaze shot towards the little boy's right hand as he spoke. The temperature in Spring City at the end of April wasn't low. The little boy wore a small cashmere glove on his hand. The sleeve of the glove covered his entire right arm tightly. The little fellow was very sensitive. He lowered his raised right arm. Luo Nan felt that he was being a bit rude, so he stopped teasing the little boy. "Forget it. Let's go. Even if you're being kind, you need to finish what you started." He didn't ask the little boy about the map anymore. Even though he didn't know what Cave 47 and Cave 57 were, he had an entire set of water maps of the karst cave terrain in his mind. He was very clear that he just needed to head east and cross a secret underwater passage to enter the cave market. There was a small trading market at the edge of the cave market. It was naturally convenient to go there. He grabbed the little fellow's collar out of habit and prepared to head east. Who knew that the little fellow would struggle? "Go that way." The little boy used his left hand to point in the direction they came from. "Go back. There's still a long way to go to the market. The return trip is even shorter." "Are you bullying me for not having a map?" Luo Nan was amused. He thought about the cause and effect of encountering this little boy, and a guess blurted out, "Kid, you didn't run away from home, did you?" "I didn't." The little boy firmly refuted. His round eyes didn't even blink. He had a clear conscience. Luo Nan was just about to expose his lie when his sensory network captured a change in the river. He simply crossed his arms and didn't move. "Then let's wait a bit longer. I have a premonition that the adults of your family will come looking for us soon." The little boy's eyes suddenly flashed. He clearly became nervous. His body still wanted to shrink back, but Luo Nan reached out and grabbed him by the collar. Luo Nan calmly sized up the little boy a few more times after locking him in place. He coughed twice, cleared his throat, and suddenly increased his volume. He shouted with abundant energy, "Hello. Is there anyone here? Help. There's someone trapped here. There's a child among them." The little boy was stupefied the instant Luo Nan shouted. He soon began to struggle violently. But how could he compete with Luo Nan, who already had considerable accomplishments in the fleshly body? Extending his arms and kicking his legs, twisting his waist and shaking his shoulders were of no use. In the end, the little boy couldn't take it anymore. He let loose a torrent of curses. "You idiot! Do you want to die?" Kids these days really weren't cute. Luo Nan touched the hood of the cloak that covered his face. He turned to look at the little boy's flushed face and the fact that he couldn't continue after spitting out the profanity. He couldn't vent his anger and panic, but he didn't get angry from being offended. This showed that Luo Nan had a good personality. "Forget it. Luonan didn't deny that the little boy and the people on the small boat sailing over from the distant waterway had their emotions suddenly fluctuate after hearing Luonan's shout. The color and structure of their emotions had more or less made Luonan pay attention to them. However, it was too late to say anything now. The waterway was soon illuminated by bright spotlights. The strong light pushed the shadows of the stalagmites in the water, rocking this isolated karst cave. Far away in the waterway, two small boats that were exactly the same as the ones sunk to the bottom of the waterway. They sailed over from the waterway one after the other. Yep, there was a third one underwater. The small boat was still some distance away from this place, but someone was already shouting on the boat, "Polio, is that you?" No one answered. The person on the boat continued to shout loudly, "Friend over there. Look after the child. We're almost there. You're quite polite." Luonan faced the little boy with a smile, still grabbing him by the collar. He really did look after the boy. The little boy glared fiercely at Luonan and cursed with a hoarse voice, "You idiot. This cloak and hat is really quite stupid. Alright, you're called Polio. What's your nickname? Idiot." Chapter 7:12. Two small boats approached on the surface of the water. There were a total of 3 people on the boats. The muscular man in the lead didn't wait for the boats to reach the shore. He jumped ashore first. Under the dim light, his skin was dark, his face was full of stubble, and his eyes were shining. This was especially true when he saw Luonan carrying the little boy Polio. "Polio, are you okay?" The bearded man expressed his deep concern. Luonan deduced from Polio's previous reaction that Polio would spit at him, or at the very least, struggle more fiercely. However, when the bearded man came ashore, the little fellow just hung his head and didn't say a word. Then, the bearded man sized up Luonan. He was a bit stunned when he saw Luonan's attire. Of course, cloaked men like this were not rare in the U-Hole market. After all, this was the vagrant exchange. Aside from the local authority dogs, there were also some vagrant criminals wanted by the Star Alliance Committee. The most important reason was that there were too many people coming here. They specialized in tricking people. It was best to be able to cover their faces. The bearded man immediately reacted. He grinned, revealing a mouthful of white teeth. He gave Luonan a cupped fist salute that was rarely seen in the outside world, but was quite common here. This was to avoid the awkwardness of shaking hands with people like the cloaked man. "Friend, many thanks. This child Polio has been tormenting us quite a bit. Friend, my boat sank to the bottom of the water over there. It collided with the little fellow's submarine." "Really? Then I'm really sorry." Clearly, the bearded man knew how Polio had run away from home. His smile was a bit awkward. The little boy still didn't raise his head. He just greeted coldly, "Uncle Lewin." The bearded man laughed bitterly. "Polio, it's rare for your mom to go out. She entrusted you to me, and your Aunt Fun. Now that your Aunt Fun is sick, you can't be tormenting her." Polio said coldly, "I'm not tormenting her. There's just a problem with the experiment." The bearded man smiled bitterly at Luonan. He had the feeling of helplessness and love from an elder. He seemed to be seeking Luonan's approval. But Luonan's expression couldn't be conveyed under the double cover of the cloak and mask. Well, no matter how stubborn Polio was, the adults of his family had come looking for him. He had to return. Luonan, this customer of the exchange who disregarded past enmity and acted bravely for a just cause, obviously needed to be well received. Both sides exchanged names. Luonan naturally referred to himself as a smelting furnace. No one here would care. The 2 small boats on the surface carried them back. As there were only 2 seats on each boat, Zhang Lu and smiled and said, "I'll squeeze with Polio. Brother Furnace, you take that boat." This was a very normal arrangement, but Luonan chuckled. "Polio and I are the smallest here. It's most convenient for us to be together. Am I right, Polio?" The boy looked up for the first time and only saw the silly hat blocking his line of sight. Half a second later, he nodded slightly as a tacit agreement. Zhang Lu was taken aback for a moment. Then he smiled and said, "All right, I won't squeeze with you guys over here. Listen Z, take care of the guests. Another small boat sailed over and invited Luo Nan and Polio to board. Standing on the boat was a tall and thin young man. His eyes weren't big, and when he smiled, they became slits. When he saw Polio, he sighed and said, "My little ancestor." Polio didn't pay attention to him at all. The two small boats set off. In the beginning, the young man, XNZ, tried to communicate with Luo Nan and Polio, but the two of them remained silent to the end. They didn't communicate with each other, and the atmosphere soon sank. On the other small boat, Zhang Lu, and spoke a few words from afar at first, but then he became silent when he saw the situation. Only the faint noise of the small boat's motors could be heard along the way. The atmosphere was quite unbearable for the rest of the journey. As for the small boat that followed them underwater, it didn't follow them back. Instead, it continued to move forward to the waters where the incident happened. It found Luo Nan's overturned vehicle and the submarine disguised as a stalagmite. It circled back and forth a few times, studying them. Luo Nan didn't care too much. He just switched back and forth a few layers of the sensor network. He looked silent and silent, but he wasn't idle at all. He didn't care if other people were having a hard time or not. They traveled along the winding waterway for another 7 or 8 kilometers before the core area of the U-Hole market was finally in sight. Luo Nan extended his head and looked at the chaotic and flickering area. His finger, which had been on Polio's collar, moved inwards and pinched him. "You said it. You're letting me stay at your house tonight." Polio raised his head in surprise, but he was pressed down by Luo Nan. He could only let out a muffled groan as though he was admitting it with a tsundere attitude. On the other side, Zhang Lu smiled. "It's not like we can't even find a place to rest here, Brother Smelter. It's nothing. We can learn from each other if we stay together." This kid built a malfunctioning stone shell. His nostrils are all the way to the top of his skull. If I don't show him my high standards, he'll think that the well is the sky. Zhang Lu and asked, "Brother, are you proficient in mechanical design?" "At least I'm a little better than most people." Luo Nan made up a lie. He turned to Polio and said, "We're professionals. Don't forget to ask your mother to give me a discount when we go shopping." The small boat was docked at the dock. Luo Nan grabbed Polio and jumped ashore. Then he chose 2 electric hoverbikes and gave one to Polio. He stretched and said, "After a long day, I need a good sleep." "After a long day, I definitely need to have a good sleep. Only your place is secluded and there are not many people around." Besides Polio, Zhang Lu and Z, and the others looked at each other in bewilderment. Frequent customer? Why didn't they see it earlier? Zhang Lu and the others could no longer say anything to this cloaked man who was speaking incoherently. Their hearts were filled with bewilderment. XNZ pretended to have a slip of the tongue and asked, "Brother Furnace, did you come to our U-Hole before?" "Oh, sorry." Luo Nan was natural and unrestrained as he said, "He came here a few times, but it was anonymous." XNZ wanted to ask what was the relationship between Luo Nan and Polio. But Luo Nan had already led Polio forward on the hoverbike. He didn't show any signs of hesitation. Polio's mother's shop in the U-Hole market was quite large. It occupied a small karst cave that had been modified. It was located in a remote area, and it took some time to get there. However, Luo Nan led the way the entire time. The journey was smooth, and they didn't take any detours. Zhang Lu and the others were even more confused. They didn't say anything when they reached the shop. They left in a hurry with their heads full of doubts. After they left, Polio stared with wide eyes and asked, "Were you sent by my mother?" "Sorry, you're thinking too much." Luo Nan dispelled the boy's extravagant hopes. He didn't care about Polio's gloomy expression. He sized up the layout of the shop with interest. Just as he had observed through the sensor network, this shop was a repair center that sold mechanical parts. The layout of the shop was quite good, if he ignored the obvious signs of destruction. Luo Nan had long since set his eyes on the hand-assembled, wild-looking heavy-duty SUV behind the display window. He felt that this was simply the arrangement of the heavens. "This car is mine." "Ah, I'll help you solve your problem. Give this car to me." Polio was indeed a precocious boy, but he couldn't find any logic in his small brain when facing a character like Luo Nan, who defied common sense. He subconsciously raised his right arm to make a gesture of strength, but his expression suddenly changed when he raised his right arm halfway. His entire arm froze in midair. It swayed up and down, but it no longer obeyed his orders. Luo Nan looked over. Polio's face was swollen red. He turned around and ran madly toward the second floor of the shop. But no matter how intense his movements were, his right arm maintained a stiff posture. It was hard to move. Luo Nan didn't follow. He stood in place and frowned. 2 minutes later, there was a bang from upstairs. Something crashed down and rolled on the ground, making an ear-piercing noise. What followed was a series of smaller crashes, one after another. Luo Nan hesitated for a moment, but he still walked upstairs. Polio was half kneeling on the ground in a room on the second floor. There was an empty box in front of him, and there were other parts and sundries on the ground. They were undoubtedly the source of the previous noise. Polio's right arm maintained a stiff posture. His movable left hand pounded the floor again and again without holding back. He was gritting his teeth. His eyes were red and tears were swirling, but he didn't let them fall. Luo Nan couldn't help but be moved by the intense emotions of a 5- or 6-year-old child who was controlling them in a self-mutilating manner. Polio finally noticed Luo Nan at the door. He subconsciously wanted to retract his arm, but he completely lost the ability to control it. He could only let it lie rigidly by his side. He didn't let down the sleeve that he had just rolled up, revealing a large portion of the skeleton with a metallic luster. Polio's red eyes met Luo Nan's hidden eyes behind the mask. He subconsciously wanted to dodge. But he quickly restrained his impulse and roared back with an even more unyielding attitude. "What are you looking at? Have you never seen a prosthetic before?" Luo Nan didn't speak, and he didn't deliberately avoid anything. Polio saw that he couldn't move Luo Nan, so he didn't waste any more energy. He bit his lips and used his left hand to tidy up the sundries on the floor. "It's out of battery and the backup battery. I lost it. It's not a big deal, I just need to charge it." As soon as he finished speaking, there was a click from somewhere. Immediately after, the lights above his head began to flicker, and the relay protectors began to take effect. The problem was that in less than a second, true darkness rapidly expanded, filling the room, the storefront, and even the surrounding area. Polio was stunned on the spot. He allowed the darkness to swallow him. Only the sound of his intermittent breathing could be heard in the room. Polio's left hand pressed against the sharp edges of the sundries on the floor, allowing the real pain to be transmitted to his brain. It was a stark contrast to his heavy right arm. He forcefully bit his lower lip and controlled his breathing. He didn't want to lose face in front of that mysterious fool. But this darkness was pitch black and didn't allow light to pass through. It was like a thick blanket draped over his body. It was a little warm, like a mother's blanket. It wasn't shameful to cover Daodu with a blanket. The hot little Daoud finally rolled down from his eye sockets, and streaks of tears were drawn on his face. Polio didn't forget to maintain his manly dignity. He spoke forcefully so that the fool could hear him clearly. If possible, he wanted to let those unscrupulous creatures hear him. Chapter 7:13. Who cut off the electricity like it was on fire? About a few hundred meters away from Polio's shop, Zhang Lu, An's footsteps were so quick that he almost kicked the door open. He growled at the group of people in the hall. There were 7 or 8 people sitting or standing in the hall, and they all looked over in shock. Zhang Lu An's face was rough, but he was very scheming. Otherwise, he wouldn't have such a wife by his side and still be able to plan today's events. However, the ups and downs of the situation tonight and the successive changes put him under great pressure. It also caused him to have a bellyful of evil fire, which immediately exploded when he was stimulated. Brethren, someone came up and tried to explain, but Zhang Lu and thought he was the culprit. He glared at him and pushed him in the chest. "Are you an idiot? You can't even understand the gravity of the situation. That furnace isn't easy to get along with. Have you ever seen a guy who can roll around in the waterway without a single drop of water on him? Either he's lying, or he has special abilities. He clearly knows that the U-hole is deep, but he still barged in. Do you think people like that can be provoked so easily? The person who tried to explain looked aggrieved. Brethren, it was Mr. Wright who ordered it. Mr. Wright? Zhang Lu's temper was blocked, but he quickly gritted his teeth and said, even if it was Mr. Wright, even if it was me, so what? A cold voice interrupted him. A door at the back of the hall opened, and a tall, middle-aged white man walked out, wiping the blood off his hands with a white gauze. Zhang Lu's pupils shrank. He tried to see through Wright's shoulder and the darkness behind the hall to see the situation in the room. His expression was so obvious that everyone in the hall could roughly see what was going on. The tall white man, Wright, threw the blood-stained gauze into the trash can and said coldly, "Don't worry, I left you some dignity. I didn't do anything too excessive. But because of this, your wife was able to show her loyalty and toughness and didn't reveal any valuable information." Zhang Lu's expression was very ugly. Even if he and his wife parted ways and became enemies, asking others to interrogate and torture him was undoubtedly a double denial of his dignity and ability. Disregarding everything else, the subordinates in the hall were obviously following Wright's lead. This was also a very natural thing. After all, Brain Demon, Wright was publicly recognized as one of the bloodiest figures in the wilderness. He was rather powerful and had a great reputation. He was just a middle-ranking member of a small order that had rebelled against him. In fact, didn't Zhang Lu and himself only make up his mind to rebel after seeing Wright? After thinking for a while, Zhang Lu's anger was almost gone. He could only fight for some face for himself. Mr. Wright, we haven't found any traces of the church's holy relic yet. That bastard is a very important bargaining chip. Now that a cloaked man suddenly jumped out, it's really not suitable to take drastic measures before we figure out his identity and stance. It was already bad enough when we searched the store. If we aggravate the situation and cause a conflict, we won't be able to get any more clues from Wu Jun. Mr. Zhang, I think you have a tendency to exaggerate Wu Jun's and your husband's willpower. Wright's grayish-blue eyes stared straight at him. You have to understand that a person's willpower is just an illusory bubble in front of instinct. People can keep secrets only because the willpower bubble hasn't been burst, or because they've made some cunning coding programs for their thoughts. These methods are not a problem for us. Zhang Lu opened his mouth to say something, but he was interrupted by Li's hand. The reason I agreed to your shoddy plan, other than demanding a perfect result, is that Spring City is currently in a very sensitive period. It's not suitable to make any big movements. But didn't you notice that the cloaked man was playing with you from the beginning to the end? At the same time, he forced himself to add drama. He has a strong desire to show off, even if it's a shameful face. This is a happy offender, a typical troublemaker. With him around, your arrangements against that little bastard are meaningless. Happy offender? You're the A-level felon wanted by the Star Alliance Committee, okay? What do you mean by demanding perfect results? Isn't it because you're the one who can't see the light of day? Zhang Lu tried to remind him. But if we provoke him like this, won't we make a bigger move? Also, we don't know his background. What if he's a super troublesome guy? That depends on luck. Wright smiled. I think you're lucky. If he's a trap left by Wu Jun, and if he's a troublesome strong guy like you said, you'd have been swatted to death like a fly the moment the power went out. Since you're here alive, that person's strength shouldn't be strong enough to break through the situation. For safety's sake, no matter how much stimulation he faces, he'll probably endure it or wait for a chance to escape. Protecting that bastard is the first priority, and we can set up the trap here. If he's not. If he's just a self-righteous idiot who sees injustice, then the reason is right in front of you. He's an outsider who hides his head but shows his tail, and you, Zhang Lu, are the temporary guardian of that little pineapple. If there's a conflict, the exchange in Spring City will undoubtedly stand on your side. Hey, have you forgotten about the Grade A wanted criminal? It's hard to say for the Ability User Association in Spring City, but the military system is counting on people like you to provide funds. Zhang Lu swallowed the words that were on the tip of his tongue. From his nickname, it could be seen that the legendary Brain Demon was never a good-tempered person. He could only beat around the bush again. But Wu Jun's relationship with the exchange and the Ability User Association is very good. If we really provoke those people, things will become very complicated. Don't you still have me? The corner of Leet's mouth split open. In his dark red mouth, the tip of his tongue that was shaking was as long as a blunt needle. What I want to do is work with my children to shut up those disobedient fellows in time and prepare a delicious meal at the same time. The interior of Polio's shop was pitch black, but the precocious Polio didn't shed Lil P. He widened his eyes and looked at the energy bar of his multifunctional mechanical arm that was slowly but visibly increasing. At first, he thought it was an illusion. After all the power sources in his house were useless. Wires, wireless charging, and other devices were meaningless. However, the charging motion under his eyelids was still progressing steadily. He moved the mechanical arm of his right hand slightly. His bionic fingers flexed and stretched, and the various parts of his body were checked. There were no problems. You can move a bit more. As long as I'm here, it's very easy to charge. Pineapple unconsciously grinned. He found it hard to suppress his excitement. Silly, you're too awesome. All right, I'm really quite silly. I ran a marathon and an hour of tests just to help you charge. What was I thinking? Pineapple was slow for a moment before he finally came to a realization. Sorry, you're called Electric Furnace, right? I understand. You deserve to be tormented by others. After accompanying Pineapple through the initial excitement, the little boy's feelings toward Luo Nan were completely different. However, compared to the emotional changes, the process of accumulating electricity seemed to take a long time. Luo Nan's electromagnetic configuration was like killing a chicken with a butcher's knife. However, he was still unable to change the physical properties of the power source. He still needed to have the necessary time. The topic naturally extended from the mechanical arm to explore the source and cause and effect. Of course, this was a sensitive topic. In the past, Pineapple would have been unwilling to talk about it. But now, his mood was on a roller coaster. He had seen worse situations, so he was more or less desensitized. The continuous injection of electricity washed away the haze in Pineapple's mind. It gave him more courage to talk about everything to his new friend. The little fellow opened the hollow chamber on the upper part of the mechanical arm. Here, this is my arm. In Luo Nan's eyes, Pineapple's right arm, wrist, hand, fingers, and other body structures were all intact. There seemed to be no problems with the deeper bones, joints, muscles, and blood vessels. However, its total length was less than 20 centimeters. Judging from Pineapple's age and height, the length of his arm should be more than half that of a newborn. This was the level of a newborn baby. There was no doubt that this was some sort of developmental deformity. Ever since I was born, this arm has stopped growing. It has been maintained in this state. I have no way of controlling it. It's just an extra section. Faced with this situation, Luo Nan did not know what to say in order to not agitate Pineapple. He could only maintain his silence. The little boy became calmer as he spoke. Mom told me that with the current level of technology, there would definitely be a way. She brought me to see many doctors and made many plans, but she was never satisfied with them. Last year, Mom asked someone to order this mechanical arm for me. She said that it was temporary. Actually, I feel that other than its endurance, everything else is fine. Pineapple pretended to be magnanimous when faced with Luo Nan's gaze. With it, I can do many things that other children can't compare to. Although I wasn't the one who designed the stalagmite, I spent more than 2 months to assemble it based on the blueprints alone. Then it ran aground. Luo Nan regretted it the moment he spoke. Pineapple didn't retort. He just lowered his head and said, "There must be a problem with the shock absorber." I didn't want to cause trouble for Mom. After Aunt Fin sent me a warning signal, I wanted to dive into the water and run away. However, I shouldn't have walked that route. The depth of the water and the width of the water channel are too much for me. It would have been better to hide in the deeper parts of the karst cave. Luo Nan watched a 5- or 6-year-old child seriously review his assembled underwater mechanical vehicle and the route planning problems. Even though Luo Nen wasn't considered an adult, he couldn't help but feel a sense of crisis, as if he was about to be slapped to death on the beach. What was I doing when I was 5 years old? I was probably crying because of my spineless dad. Kids these days. Luo Nen suddenly thought of something when his thoughts reached this point. Where's your dad? That? What's that? Is it edible? Chapter 7:14. Polio was young, and he had been tossed and turned for an entire night. His mood had changed drastically, so he unconsciously lay on the floor and fell asleep halfway through the charge. Even though he was fast asleep, he still half-hugged the cold and hard mechanical arm to his chest, using his body temperature to warm it up. This position was not too comfortable, so the little fellow's brows were constantly furrowed. Occasionally, he would even move his body. Luo Nan was not sleepy at all. He sat cross-legged in the darkness, watching the little boy beside him. His mind was still filled with the emotional stirrings that arose from this. There were also chaotic and distracting thoughts from his rhythm and plans that had been completely disrupted. The underground karst cave was quite stuffy, especially after the blackout. The equipment had stopped working, and ventilation was a problem. Luo Nan felt very uncomfortable. Luo Nan grabbed the thick and heavy cloak to give himself a gust of wind. His fingers made contact with his chest as he rose and fell. The sensation was soft with a hint of hardness. His chest swelled up slightly, forming a clear contrast with the surrounding muscles. Luo Nan was stunned for a moment. He immediately recalled that this was the biochemical reactor. The biochemical reactor had been remolded. After his somatic cells were initialized by the arrangement of tinder within the furnace, they were transformed into fully functional stem cells that proliferated and split. In a certain sense, it was already a part of his body. It was his external organ. There would be no difference even if he took it and sliced it. In comparison, the other artificial muscles that were produced by the biochemical reactor were constructed together with the exoskeleton armor. Their structure was based on Luo Nan's stem cells, and they were modulated according to the formula. The structural strength was similar, but it was more suitable for electromagnetic configurations. Reality proved that Luo Nan's physical strength was a bit lacking. At that time, he had used 2 portions of the substrate to create an electromagnetic muscle membrane structure that was far larger than the furnace body. However, when it came to actual combat experiments, he had only created a paradigm before everything was blown to smithereens. Only the biochemical reactor remained. It enjoyed the same safety mechanism as Luo Nan's main body. The biochemical reactor's various functional areas had already been restored, and its volume had increased by a bit. It was embedded in the juncture between his chest and abdomen, like a demonic insect that had pierced into his flesh and bones. Luo Nan used his fingertips to poke and prod at the biochemical reactor. These were all subconscious movements, and he used this opportunity to organize his thoughts. After a moment, he finally had a clear plan, and the inside of the biochemical reactor correspondingly changed. Luo Nan waited for the corresponding functional areas within the reactor to start operating. He extended his hand and touched Polio's deformed and undeveloped arm with his fingertips. He didn't make any other movements, but a collection tube originating from the biochemical reactor did a slight extension. It collected a bit of Polio's skin tissue and stored it in the storage area. This action was almost exactly the same as what Li Yiwei and Renqi had done earlier. However, the 2 of them were collecting the special secretions of a mutated human. Luo Nan just wanted to collect a bit of pineapple's cell tissue for an experiment. He was thinking that the biochemical reactor's tissue regeneration technology was exactly what Polio needed. Luo Nan couldn't be considered a philanthropic person, but since he ran into her, he would obviously help if he could. Unfortunately, after a short period of analysis and experimentation, the virtual brain system gave him a disappointing result. Indeed, the biochemical reactor could rely on the arrangement of the furnace and a special formula to realize the initialization of somatic cells. Through the absorption of energy and nutrients, the cells could undergo rapid fission and multiplication, forming body tissue that was no different from the main body. It could even mutate into a special creation like the electromagnetic muscle membrane structure. However, the premise of all this was the ownership of the biochemical reactor and the control of the tinder. Luo Nen used his unique soul strength mode and the structural characteristics of his body and soul, which were blended into one after his formal awakening, to serve as the foundation for the biochemical reactor's activation and interdependence. Simply speaking, once bound, this night-level, basic colonization-type biochemical reactor could only be used by Luo Nan alone. He could also initialize polio's cell tissue and reconstruct the tissue structure. However, this was a new product that had absorbed the characteristics of polio's fleshly body. Luo Nan could use it, but if he transplanted it to polio, the consequences of rejection, genetic pollution, mutation, and other unpredictable consequences would come one after another. Luo Nan vowed not to give up until the child was tormented to death. Taking 10,000 steps back, even if Luo Nan reformatted the biochemical reactor, erased all traces of himself, and gifted it to polio. With polio's current state and the foundation of his body and soul that lacked the support of extraordinary strength, it was impossible for him to realize ignition and activation. The strong always inadvertently possessed something, and vice versa. Luo Nen spat out a mouthful of turbid air. He temporarily gave up on the idea of borrowing the biotech of an unknown civilization to treat polio. Let's return to a more realistic level. That fellow with the vicious nickname was sharpening his blade, preparing to turn him into reserve rations. Brain demon? Who's that? Luo Nen had a good habit of asking his secretary if there was something he couldn't decide on. He once again opened up the closed system network. Now that he had to hide from Sister Yuan, the only person he could consult was Cat Eyes. What brain demon? Cat Eyes answered a few calls before arriving at Gear on the north bank of Acumen College in the middle of the night. She was yawning, wanting to take a nap. She was conserving her energy in preparation to cover for that extremely unreliable boss tomorrow morning. Her favorite place to sleep was naturally the bar counter with alcohol. Therefore, she went to the public activity room on the second floor of the basement. Because she was sleepy and drunk, her brain was a bit sluggish when she heard this unfamiliar name. She paused for a moment before remembering, brain demon? That moronic fugitive who believes in eating his own brain? That's a bit too much information. One moment you don't have money, and the next moment you're a wanted criminal. That's a lot of information, okay? Don't tell me you didn't pass the credit rating? Have you already fallen to the point of capturing wanted criminals to earn money? Cough, how is that possible? Actually, it's like this. Luo Nan had a general understanding of the sequence of events from Polio's narration. Actually, even if he didn't go through Polio, just the intelligence gathering of the mental sensor network was enough to string together a basic chain of events. The framework of the events was very simple. Polio's mother, Boss June, was an important character in a vagrant power. Zhang Lu, Tan XNZ, and the others were members of this power. Zhang Lu, Anne's wife, was Aunt Fun, and she was Boss June's confidant. But due to some reason or conflict of interest, Zhang Lu and the others became traitors. They took advantage of Boss June's absence to deal with the problem to raise the flag. No, it was a covert rebellion. Zhang Lu and the others were in a dilemma due to more complicated reasons. They clearly did something, but they didn't dare to go too far. They just wanted to capture Polio and use him as a bargaining chip. This gave Polio the chance to escape, and he met Luo Nan on the way. Luo Nan felt that he had spoken very clearly, but Cat Eyes didn't gain anything other than another round of yawns. Forget it. I shouldn't have had any confidence in your ability to express yourself. No wonder President Ouyang said that if it weren't for your quick sketching skills, the brains of the pitiful people who listened to your lessons would have exploded. I didn't say it clearly. You should be involved in the conflict between the powers of the vagrants of the wilderness. You have to know that the tribes and gangs of the wilderness are as numerous as the hairs on an ox. 3 to 5 people make up a gang. 10 people make up a gang. There are also clans, companies, societies, and orders. Even a sociologist specializing in research wouldn't be able to figure out the twists and turns within. It's normal that you can't say it clearly. If you do, then it must be a misconception. However, if you can't even complete the basics of verbal expression, then it means that you lack a clear understanding of the core of this matter. In the end, you only want to intervene and help because you feel that the child called polio is pitiful. You also feel that brain demon and the others are annoying. Well, you can say it like that. Then it's fine. That's right. I understand what you mean. This time it was Cat Eye's turn to be stupefied. What did I say? Isn't it just a simple matter to be solved simply? Don't let your imagination run wild and complicate things. Don't worry, I understand. A fall into the pit, a gain in your wit. I definitely won't repeat the mistake I just made. Cat Eyes pressed her forehead against the bar counter. This bro was letting himself loose outside. Had he even lost his ability to understand? Luo Nan obtained the answer and didn't say anything more. His consciousness shrunk into the depths of the closed system network. Cat Eyes drank too much wine. She had a toothache. She also had a bad premonition. The matter was heading in an unpredictable direction. She suddenly thought of an unverified rumor. Wait a moment. That brain demon is a world-renowned master hypnotist. It's said that he can control mutants. Moreover, he has close ties with some powerful organization. Otherwise, he wouldn't have lived for so long. Understood. Understood your ass. Cat Eyes thought of the storm that could arise 2,000 kilometers away. She would likely be in a mess if she joined forces with it here. She just wanted to soak her head in a wine jar. Just as her entire body was powerless, she suddenly sensed something. The chair beneath her body spun around, propelling her body to face the person who just entered. Secretary, are you tired of being a secretary? Are you a spy? The person who came in was Yuan. She was a lone figure, appearing noiselessly in the public activity room. Her expression was solemn. She was serious in speech and manner. She could really scare someone sick in the middle of the night. Good evening, Cat Eyes. There's no need to greet me so formally. Actually, it would have been bad if it was just a little bit closer. Speaking of which, what's the matter? Didn't you just make a call? It's about Mr. Luo. He's not even here. Is there a need to be polite? Yuan wouldn't change her habits and cultivation just because of a few words from someone else. However, since she was personally here, she didn't beat around the bush. She went straight to the point. Mr. Luo has become quite headstrong recently. You know this. Cat Eyes blinked. The boss is headstrong. Can his secretary complain? Yuan didn't resist the joking title of secretary. Instead, a faint smile appeared on her solemn face. I haven't been taking advantage of my duties recently. It's mostly because I can't keep up with Mr. Luo's tempo. What tempo does he have? He's testing the tempo of the world. Chapter 7:15. In Xia City, it was around 4 o'clock in the morning. Some early morning trainers were already on the streets. But at the same time, it was also the time when people were the most tired. For example, Cat Eyes had soaked in alcohol and a pile of vexing matters for most of the night. She also had to deal with Vice President He, who was famous for being shrewd and capable. She felt extremely tired. When a person was tired, they lost their patience, so she didn't want to guess the deeper meaning of Yuan's words. She only curled her lips and knocked on the table. Get to the point. Yuan did not mind her attitude. She was no longer as serious as before. She walked to the front of the bar and sat down on the high stool next to Cat Eyes. She casually picked up a cup and played with it. How can there be an important point in the world? Actually, I came here on a whim to find someone to chat with. Cat Eyes raised her eyebrows. Oh my. The problem becomes serious the moment the leader starts chatting. Yuan laughed again. Cat Eyes, you've been in good shape lately, which eye of yours sees that I'm not bad? You can call it a judgment. At most, in another month or two, we can see the architect? Cat Eyes blinked her eyes. I'm not the one who wants to ascend. Yes, the growth of supernatural powers is often like natural development. It's just that it doesn't grow from a baby to an adult. Rather, it struggles out of its mother's womb and opens its eyes to see the world. Hee hee, I know you're talking about someone. Do you want a drink? Seeing Hiyuan nod her head, Cat Eyes snapped her fingers. The robot bartender behind the counter woke up from its standby state and concocted cocktails for the two. Amidst the soft sounds of the cup, liquor, soda, and ice cubes colliding, Hiyuan's voice also carried a bit of an indistinct meaning. When extraordinary power substantially rises a level, it's almost equivalent to a rebirth. Just like a newborn baby, what he sees and feels is completely different from when he was in his mother's womb. So it's normal to test and adapt. That's right, we need to verify the results. But you must also take note that the baby is only stretching out his soft fingers, while we might be stretching out our deadly blades, and Mr. Luo. The finished cocktail was placed in front of Hiyuan. The light blue wine swirled in the saucer-shaped champagne glass, like the transparent seawater near the shore. However, as soon as his fingers exerted force, the wine in the cup turned into a whirlpool, violently rubbing against the walls of the cup. What Mr. Luo found out is a storm that can stir up the world. Cat Eyes let out a whistle. So what if he did? Just because he can control the storm, we have to tie up all his fingers or just chop them off. Hiyuan gave a rare shrug. I just believe that there are shortcuts to experience and learning. Words. Some things might as well be said directly. Anyway, I don't really like this boss. If your conditions are right, maybe I'll agree on the spot. Sorry, I don't know. Hiyuan took a sip of the light blue wine and immediately let the rim of the cup stop at her lips. She subconsciously bit down on it. This was a very uncharacteristic action of Secretary He, but Cat Eyes found it a bit more pleasing to the eye. There is only a fine line between wanting others to do something and forcing others to do something. I don't think I can grasp the scale of this, so I hope to find more people to help me think about it. And then you found me? Cat Eyes tilted her head to look at her. Hiyuan smiled and raised her cup to show her respect. Well, it's my pleasure. Cat Eyes also picked up her own cup. As an unfortunate person who has already been swept away by the storm, do you want to hear the truth from me? Please speak. Cat Eyes drained the cup of strong wine in one gulp. She borrowed the hot and spicy energy that rushed down her throat and into her brain to laugh heartily. Those unfortunate people who are about to be swept away by the storm, welcome. To be swept away by a fellow like Luo Nan serves you right for being unlucky. Don't forget to thank me. In the end, the laughter from 2,000 kilometers away could not reach Spring City. It was impossible for the living beings here to receive the messages filled with schadenfreude. This was especially true within Zhonglu and store in the Yuhol market. The sounds of discussion in the great hall outside were clamorous. It was necessary to close the door in order to keep the inner room quiet. An unplanned flaw had appeared in the operation. Everyone felt uneasy in their hearts. Compared to the people outside, the people in the bedroom unconsciously and unconsciously stood in a more central position. They played a more important role. Within the entire store, the only person who had lost her freedom was Lady Yen Fun. Right now she was lying on a bed. Her entire body was stiff, and her breathing was weak. She wore only a thin layer of clothing on her body. Many parts of the clothing were dark red and glued together. She looked weak and miserable. In front of the bed, Wright slowly and methodically put on a pair of sterile gloves. I don't like bugs. Their way of thinking is completely different from ours. However, the mutant types of insects are the most abundant in the wilderness. Many functions can be found from their bodies. For example, the one that will appear next. I call it the treasure bug. It can secrete many kinds of pheromones. It doesn't matter what effect these pheromones have within its race. We only need to be concerned about what kind of effect it will have on the state of the human body and mind. Wright put on the gloves and his 10 fingers flexed a few times. He was like a strict doctor. Next, he extended his hand and very gently supported Yenfen's cheeks, helping her straighten out her position. All pheromones are very direct things. They evoke the target's emotions and instincts of desire. I don't need to hide it. The research of pheromones in the world today is mainly focused on the aspect of sexual instincts. The results obtained from this are also the greatest. After all, they can radiate many levels of the human body and mind. The higher the level of the animal, the wider the range of radiation. The effects are also more interesting. Yenfen wasn't a little girl who didn't understand the ways of the world. Her mind was also very clear, and she immediately captured the key words and sensitive words in Wright's mouth. She instinctively struggled, but her body that had been injected with neurotoxin was already completely out of control. Even her head was supported, and she was unable to move. Her eye sockets subconsciously dilated, and her eyeballs swayed back and forth as she tried to find another key figure, her husband Zhang Luan. At this moment, Zhang Luan was pursing his lips and holding a cigarette but in his hand. He stood at the farthest end of the extension cord at the end of the bed, leaning against the chest of drawers behind him. This was a position that Yenfen absolutely couldn't see at the moment, and with Wright blocking in front, he could also avoid most scenes that he didn't want to see. However, the electronic photo frame propped up on the chest of drawers was still playing a collection of photos belonging to the husband and wife. This made Zhang Luan very irritated, and he turned his elbow back to press it flat against the surface of the cabinet. Wright was a demon that could read people's minds. It was as if he was speaking to Yenfen from the tip of her heart. "I want to thank your husband. Previously, out of politeness, I had deliberately avoided similar interrogation methods, but now we have coordinated and reached a consensus. Of course, I will maintain the most basic respect for a tough woman like you, Ms. Yenfen. I also ask you not to wear colored glasses to view the use of sex pheromones. It is only a key to open the door of your instinctive desires. You will experience a process from tension to relaxation. In fact, I hope that the frequency of your brain waves can rush up to 20 Hz, and then gradually fall back to 8 Hz and below. This will cause you to experience great ups and downs, but it will also allow you to freely let your thoughts fly. Through the connections of various desires and synesthesia, you will slowly dig out those things that you love the most, need the most, hate the most, and fear the most." Yenfen's body trembled uncontrollably. On the one hand, it was because of the strange tone and content of Wright's deliberately lengthened and lowered voice. On the other hand, it was because Wright had already started to undo her shirt, exposing the skin of her chest to full contact with the oppressive air in the room. The restless and almost explosive feeling of humiliation agitated her body and mind, and it also caused the sensitive area of her chest to produce an uncontrollable physiological reaction. "Very good, Ms. Yenfen, you are also secreting sex pheromones. You don't need to pay attention to what this means for the treasure bug. You only need to understand that it is also very sensitive to this kind of information and has a series of corresponding behaviors. Here it comes." Wright withdrew his right hand and quickly spread it out like a magic trick. He gradually lowered it to ensure that Yenfen could see the bug that had just crawled out of his cuff. The treasure bug in his mouth was flat, like a fat leaf, and was even better than a live bug. Its entire body was iron gray, and it covered almost half of Wright's palm. "This guy is a bit big, especially after it drilled into the subcutaneous tissue. The problem is a bit more serious. But I can guarantee that when the time comes, you will definitely forget about this little thing. The pleasure and pain you will feel will be far more than what it will bring you." Yenfen lay on her back on the bed, her fully exposed chest uncontrollably rising and falling, and her fit and beautiful curves were even more thoroughly revealed. This caused Wright to temporarily jump out of the role of interrogator. He turned his head and praised Zhang Luan. "You have a good eye." Zhang Luan's entire face twitched. He lowered his head and smoked, not saying a word. Compared to the current humiliation, he was more worried about the treatment and corresponding respect that the new power would give him. However, at least from Wright's side, he couldn't see anything. On the contrary, because of this interrogation, XNZ and the others downstairs would probably be at odds with him. Why was it completely different from what he had expected? On the bed, Yenfen's body suddenly trembled greatly. This was already the limit of her current physical state. The treasure bug was penetrating the skin of her chest and slowly seeping down, causing a continuous painful stimulation. Wright had described the pain as insignificant, but this was clearly not the case. Even though Yenfen's nervous system was already numb and she could barely speak a complete sentence, she still couldn't help but moan and vaguely curse at this moment. Wright smiled as he looked at all this and explained, "The treasure bug will penetrate your subcutaneous tissue and slowly move to the spine, where it will deeply fuse with your nervous system and become a special gland. Of course, I can do this from the beginning, but this process isn't meaningless. On the one hand, the treasure bug can collect and adapt to the various hormones secreted by your body during this process. On the other hand, it can also make it easier for you to enter an extreme state. Very good, you're on the right path." Chapter 716. Wright didn't react to the sudden knock on the door, but Zhang Lu and was startled. He raised his voice, "Who is it?" "Brother N." The voice outside was Zhang Lu, N's #1 subordinate, XNZ. At this time, Yen Fun on the bed seemed to be moaning and cursing a notch higher. Zhang Lu Yan's face was inexplicably hot, and he shouted back in a rough voice, "What are you shouting for? Don't you see I'm interrogating you?" He emphasized the word, "I," but his raised voice caused Wright to glance at him with dissatisfaction. Maybe I shouldn't let non-professionals in. The corner of Zhang Lu N's eyes twitched again. After Wright finished speaking, he only showed him the back of his head. Zhang Lu N threw away the cigarette but adjusted his breathing and walked over to open the door. During the process, he subconsciously tilted his head. Because his body had shifted, there was no longer light to block him. He saw his wife wriggling on the bed, and the extent of her muscles twitching was far greater than this. So much so that the open wounds left by the torture earlier burst open one after another, once again oozing blood. Zhang Lu N hurriedly turned his head again, and heard Wright continue to speak to Yen Fun. It sounded gentle, but it was chilling. "Very good, this level is just right. My professional tells me that the activity in your cerebral cortex is very intense, and they are emitting tens of times more information than normal. I believe that the secret door in your heart is now open to me." His footsteps quickened, and Zhang Lu N finally touched the doorknob. He pulled the door open with a lot of strength, but it only opened a big gap. At the same time, he used his strong body to block the gap. He stared at XNZ and said in a strict tone, "What's going on?" XNZ's expression was also quite serious. "Brother N, I just looked at the electricity meter monitor. The blackout area is obviously still running electricity. Should we take another look? Are you sure it's in Wu Jun's shop? How's the electricity consumption?" "It's not that big." Zhang Lu N was indeed listening to XNZ, but his current brain circuit was obviously not suitable for in-depth analysis. Wright's slow voice in the room was like a knife repeatedly grinding on his ear mold. "I don't mind telling you another little piece of information. In your current state, the taste of brain juice is not good. There's too much seasoning in it, so I'll give you a chance to digest it. What you need to do is to strive for a small chance of survival during this period of time. You should do your best to obey me, please me, and tell me everything you know. Of course, you should also trust me, and believe that this little fellow is a very sensitive control center, and can almost perfectly repeat all of my commands." "Why did you say almost?" "This was because the orders given to it would occasionally conflict with its instincts. So try not to beg for mercy when you reach the edge of the cliff. Who knows what accident might happen then?" At this moment, Zhang Lu N was already doing his best to keep his expression from collapsing. He could no longer look into XINZ's eyes. He just wanted to find a reason to get rid of him. "You guys go ahead and scout. We'll talk when you get back." Yen Fun, who was lying on the bed, let out a sharp scream as soon as the Boolsh *T reason came out of his mouth. Zhang Lu N's hand shook, and he almost pulled the door handle off. He slammed the door back, and it almost hit the tip of XNZ's nose. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't stop the sound from reaching the hall outside. There was no doubt that Zhang Lu N's old face had been completely thrown into the mud. When he turned around, Zhang Lu N's head was even a little dizzy. Wright was still there, muttering, "Madame Yenfen, you should maintain your strength. This is a very long process. I've seen too many people waste all their physical strength and energy before they have a mental breakdown, resulting in complete loss of control of their body functions. Not to mention the fact that it's not good for your life and health, the hygiene problems that come with it can also be a headache. The treasure bug can induce but not directly control the target's nerve center. This is more or less a flaw. Right, you pervert? You keep nagging, can't you say something meaningful? Zhang Luyan was roaring in his heart when a different voice poured into his ear. Then why not use the Vulcan ant? Not only can it achieve basic desire induction through pheromones, but it can also directly mobilize the neural network to achieve precise control. I think it's much more reliable than this treasure bug that you've been bragging about. This was Zhang Luyan's first reaction, but in the next moment, his mind suddenly went blank. It was also at this time that the door that had just been closed directly bounced open. The heavy solid wood door fiercely slammed into his face, causing him to see stars. His nose and mouth were full of a hot and fishy smell. Zhang Luyan let out a short cry of alarm, his body staggering backwards. The room door bounced back from his face, but it was quickly pushed open again. Accompanying it was XNZ's long and thin body. His number one subordinate had his back to the door and collapsed, his eyes rolling back and forth. He was already unconscious. The person who had orchestrated all of this stood at the door in a heavy cloak. He knocked twice on the solid wood door that had been tossed and turned back to show his politeness. Under the double concealment of the hood and mask, the person's eyes were still bright and sharp. He directly passed through the battered and exhausted Zhang Luyan and looked at the bed, then back and forth between Wright and Yanfun. This really is a professional question. On the side of the bed, Wright muttered softly, as if he was praising and sighing to himself. He spoke slowly, but his movements were as fast as lightning. When the door smashed into Zhang Luyan's face, he immediately grabbed Yanfun's throat, realizing the best use of resources. Then, he turned half his body and looked directly at the cloaked man by the door. He formally greeted him. "Aren't you going to introduce yourself?" His series of actions and reactions were perfect and calm. The only flaw was that it happened to coincide with Zhang Luyan's roar, which was filled with blood and mucus. "Furnace, how did you get in?" Luo Nan, who was under the cloak, turned his body to let Zhang Luyan see his subordinates lying in disorder in the hall. "Is there any use in saying all this nonsense?" "Oh, I can explain the specific reason. I'm interested in Polio's mother's shop. Oh, you should call her boss June. I'm interested in the off-road vehicle in her shop and want to swipe my card to buy it. However, I heard from Polio that the swipe terminal in the shop is temporarily managed by Aunt Fun, who is your wife. I'm in a hurry, so I came directly. I came in a hurry without any prior notice. I'm really sorry. It's just like the blackout in your market. It's easy for people to learn bad things. Was it because of the blackout?" A ridiculous idea flashed through Zhang Luyan's mind. In fact, the most logical action for him now was to make a move. However, when he saw his subordinates lying on the ground in the hall and thought about the few seconds of criminal time between him closing the door and being slammed in the face by the door, his courage to make a move unknowingly disappeared like a bubble. Then, he saw the cloaked man opposite him sway. He was here. Zhang Luyan was nearly 1.9 meters tall and was at least a head taller than the cloaked man. However, he didn't have the courage to stand in front of the cloaked man. He could only retreat awkwardly. However, he didn't control his direction well and knocked into the chest of drawers that he was leaning against. His back also knocked into a protruding corner of the electronic photo frame, causing it to fall to the ground. Why would Zhang Luyan care about such details? He hurriedly adjusted his balance and turned around with small steps. He passed through the passageway between the chest of drawers and the couch and arrived at the other side of the couch. Now, he had the double cover of the couch and right. As for what he had stepped on and broken, it was completely out of his range of attention. But after he finished a series of actions, he discovered that he wasn't in the other's range of attention at all. The fluttering cloak was merely an effect of the furnace, taking out the card terminal. This person had really brought the terminal from Wu Jun's shop. He held it in his hand and shook it a few times. He was still leaning against the door, his gaze returning to the direction of the couch. Yen Fun, who was suffering from the piercing torment of the treasure bug, clenched her teeth again. At the same time, she tried hard to turn her head, hoping to see the person who had brought such a huge change at the door. Even if she couldn't do it, she had to use some method to remind the other of the great danger hiding in a certain corner of the room. However, her throat was tightly clasped by Right. The back and forth friction between her laryngeal bone and laryngeal canal blocked her breathing passages and blood vessels, making her consciousness even more fuzzy. In a daze, she heard Wright's low, hoarse laughter. "Card payment? Looks like you have an impatient temper. How much is that car?" There was no response from inside the room. Wright was displeased. "I'm asking you, Zhang Li, how much is that off-road vehicle?" Zhang Lu and had already been reduced to a mouse in the bellows. He was completely unable to keep up with the tempo of these two people. He could only rely on his instincts to speak. I think it's 3,000 transaction points." Pineapple said to give me a 10% discount to express his gratitude. Wright sighed in admiration. "What a forthright child. Then it's 300 points. Just give it to him." But how could Zhang Lu and be willing to step forward and throw his life away? He still wanted to resist, but Wright tilted his body to the side. His ice-cold and emotionless gray-blue eyes cut over, letting Zhang Lu and understand that if he dared to say the word no, the next one to lie down as a corpse would be him. Zhang Lu and moved out step by step. His speed was touching. Wright didn't pay any more attention to him. He turned around to face Luo Nan. "We can properly discuss the problem of the control center. You mentioned the Vulcan ant just now. It really was a very professional suggestion. Frankly speaking, the laboratory here has indeed done a few experiments. However, this sort of social species suffers too many interference and influences from the social model. The Ant Queen is also a huge problem." Luo Nan tossed the swipe card terminal and responded lazily, "Worker ants and soldier ants are indeed like this. Then we'll just directly control the Ant Queen. I've heard that Brain Demon Wright is a top-notch master hypnotist. I look forward to your performance." Chapter 717. There was no need for Luo Nan to answer meaningless questions. As for Wright, his gaze spun a few times on the cloak outside. His soul strength attempted to penetrate on the mental plane. But Luo Nan was certain when he changed clothes. There really weren't many people in this world who could break through his cage and pry into his foundation. Not even the infamous Brain Demon of the wilderness could do it. On the other hand, Luo Nan sized up Wright a few times from head to toe. He more or less figured out this person's foundation. If one were to refer to the society's conventional four-dimensional measurement standard, then Wright's soul strength had a very ordinary level in the first two of the four indicators of depth, intensity, sensitivity, and affinity. Many people proposed to change depth to degrees of freedom ever since Luo Nan proposed the cage theory. This was the level of just touching upon the abyss region. Intensity was basically the average level. His accumulation couldn't be said to be robust. But in terms of sensitivity, it was very lively and nimble. Though it wasn't as free as Luo Nan's pure observation mode, the corresponding affinity region was a domain of electromagnetic waves that was several tens of hertz and below. There were rich switching variations. And this was precisely the active range of human brainwaves. The mental activities of quite a few animals and mutants could also be included in this domain. Looking at Yen Fun's specific case, it was just as Cat Eyes had given him. This wanted criminal was a master hypnotist. His techniques were skilled. If he hadn't arrived in time, Yen Fun would have long since been brought into a situation of extreme fear and despair. Her mind would have collapsed. That was all. Luo Nan evaluated Wright's strength as B in his mind. This person was able to control people's minds and hypnotize living beings. He could do many inconceivable things, but he didn't seem to be the type who excelled in combat. Speaking of which, Wright's posture was really quite stylish. Was he a frog in a well? Or did he have something to rely on? On the other side, Wright muttered to himself for a bit after several fruitless probing attempts. The smile on his face grew lively once more. He appeared to be more interested in the topic of the Vulcan ant. He made a further discussion. This, Mr. Furnace, I believe that your following statement needs to be discussed. In the Vulcan Ant Society, the Queen is a pure leader. Her specific functions can't compare to her people. And the pheromone secretion of the Vulcan ant individual can't compare to that of the myriad treasures bug. Luo Nen answered straightforwardly, one is one. One is a nest. Of course, he couldn't do it like the treasure bug, but wouldn't it be better to use the ant queen as a remote control? Multiple connections, group control, just like a normal Vulcan ant nest. Hee hee, this idea is very interesting. However, I hope that there are more solid steps. Wright was somewhat disappointed. No matter how beautiful the proposal was, it could only be described as bragging if there was no substantive entry point. In that case, there was nothing to talk about. His eyes slanted to the other side. It was said that a certain person looked tall and strong, but when he walked, he couldn't even be compared to an old lady with bound feet. Was it going to take until tomorrow to finish? Being penetrated by Wright's ice-cold gaze a second time, Zhang Liuan truly felt as if there was a blade on his back. His feet instinctively sped up, and then he arrived. Zhang Liuan's nostrils started to ache again when he reached the very close standard again. In fact, half of his face was still smeared with blood. He didn't even need to look in the mirror to know that he must be in a very sorry state. He didn't have any idea what was going on. He floated around, his voice trembling slightly. Furnace Elder, can I operate the card terminal? Of course. Luo Nan extended his hand and handed the terminal over. He waited for Zhang Liuan to take it, then he suddenly laughed. Polio is so straightforward. You're his temporary guardian, so you shouldn't fall behind. How about you give me a discount as well? Okay. Actually, the transaction points I obtained from my credit rating are only 328 points. It's quite painful to have them deducted all at once. It wouldn't be a problem if it was just a fraction. How about 28? I'll continue with the discount. Zhang Liuan revealed an awkward and helpless smile. He was completely confused by Luo Nan's words. Next, he could only stare blankly at Luo Nan as he took out the metal card representing the transaction voucher and lightly pasted it onto the card terminal. So it's like this. That's right. Wait a moment. Zhang Liuan finally remembered the basic operation, but at this stage he only had this bit of instinct left. He completely followed Luo Nan's instructions and entered the insincere number 28. A beep rang out, and the card terminal was successfully swiped. Zhang Liuan subconsciously glanced at the display screen. The basic information related to the furnace was displayed on it. It was also the basic proof for completing transactions and employment in the various vagrant exchanges such as the U-Hole Market, Fleshly Side, Mechanical Design and Assembly. Zhang Liuan didn't know why he blurted out these words. Behind him, Wright let out a laugh. What a dog's hit system. I heard that it was invented by the leader of your Xie Luo order. Oh my, he's also a dog's hit character. Wright's reaction was quite big, and Zhang Liuan's face twitched. He suddenly understood why Wright insisted on letting him swipe the card. Wright was clearly collecting information on the furnace to make a judgment. The problem was that from Wright's perspective, the answer he obtained was just like the money being swiped in. There was no sincerity to speak of. There's no fleshly side that can knock down 10 people in an instant, and at the same time, be able to completely block out the changes in the surrounding atmosphere. So, dogs hit fleshly side. This Mr. Furnace is only a mental side. Nonsense, I can guess it too. Zhang Liuan silently cursed, and Luo Nan's line of sight followed Wright's explanation at this time. He turned to look at Zhang Liu's side. Zhang Liuan instinctively revealed the hearty smile he normally wore when socializing. But his current state of mind could only seriously deform his facial expression. Even he himself felt embarrassed. Zhang Liuan. Wright's deep and low voice suddenly came from behind him. Zhang Liuan subconsciously quivered. He wanted to turn his head, but his mind suddenly went blank. Wright's words from just now reappeared in his mind. Bullshit fleshly side. It can only be the mental side. Hold on, the mental side. This fellow is a mental side. Then his close combat ability should be quite weak. Also, I'm a genuine fleshly side, and my combat ability is top-notch. Now that the distance is within reach, isn't this a great opportunity? And at this time, he saw the gaze of the furnace shift in Wright's direction. Just as it was about to turn, this was the best opportunity. A sure hit strike. The high-speed flow of thoughts instantly pieced together into a seemingly reliable chain. It was like some sort of transmission device that spurred Zhang Lu An's body, including the courage and gamble that were suppressed in the deepest depths of his heart. Zhang Lu An's mind heated up. He stamped his feet, lifted his hips, twisted his waist, and threw a punch. He borrowed the good position of standing sideways next to the furnace to unleash a left swing fist, biting towards his target's waist and kidneys like a poisonous dragon. With the current distance between the two, Zhang Lu's fist had just exerted force when the tip of his fist had already reached the edge of the cloak. Then the fist drilled inexorably inside. It hit Zhang Lu and could already feel the side muscles of his opponent's waist from the feedback of his fist. He seized the opportunity to twist his fist. He wanted to use all of his strength to smash his opponent's internal organs into mush. But in that moment, his twisting fist only tossed and turned in the empty air behind the cloak. At the same time, a figure flashed before his eyes. Just by relying on the instincts of a fighter, Luo Nan was able to determine that his opponent's feet should be a cross step. Luo Nan went against the direction of his fist and made a graceful dodge. An expert. This thought jumped out in Zhang Lu An's mind, but he was unable to correct his instinctive driving force. He could only follow the predetermined path of judgment. I can't let the distance between me and the spirit. This thought was so strong that Zhang Lu An's mind exploded with a bang. He completely lost his follow-up plan. Instead, with an absolutely unorthodox movement, his body lunged forward. His other arm also stretched out and forcefully wrapped around the furnace's waist and abdomen. Even if he couldn't hug it, he had to grab the furnace's cloak. He had to restrict this person's movements. As for what to do after that, it was completely out of Zhang Lu An's consideration. Perhaps Zhang Lu An's unorthodox movement had some unexpected results. In the next instant, he really did manage to grab the middle of the cloak. Both of their figures froze. What should I do next? Zhang Lu An was suddenly stunned. He completely didn't understand how the situation had turned out this way. It was also at this moment that Wright, who had been speaking in a low and drawn-out tone, suddenly let out a sharp whistle. At the side of the room, a layer of blurry stone powder and water mist suddenly splashed out from the stone wall structure that was originally part of the natural karst cave, blurring people's vision. A ferocious flat head the size of half a human passed through the side of the stone wall. Wrapped in a misty water mist, it opened its bloody mouth that was similar to a crocodile's, biting towards the direction where Lei Lin and the furnace were entangled. Giant salamander, the pet of the brain demon. Zhang Lu An still remembered that it was this monster that had seriously injured and subdued the skilled Yanfen in the blink of an eye when he had jumped back. Its strength was extremely strong. And now this cooperation was also seamless. Wait, I'm also in the attack range. Zhang Lu An suddenly sobered up. His mind was even more agile than usual. In an instant, he understood the role he had played in this series of actions. Even the reason why he was so fearless was also clear and obvious. He screamed, "Right!" What followed was an even sharper hissing sound. Zhang Lu An felt his body float up, and then he was thrown out by a terrifying force. And the place where the force was applied was its extended right arm. Chapter 7:18. Zhang Lu An screamed loudly. His blood flow had sped up due to him gathering his energy and exerting his strength. A large open wound suddenly appeared, and his situation turned for the worse. Blood sprayed out from the ruptured part of his flesh and blood. The enormous pain and fear that followed directly smashed his mental defenses. His entire face contorted to the limit, and he even began to tear up. Oh, what terrible execution! As Wright lamented, The giant salamander that had mistakenly struck him wasn't greedy. Its thick and fat body came over horizontally, occupying nearly half the space between the bed and the door. It also blocked between Wright and Luo Nan, becoming a solid barrier. Luo Nan avoided the fatal attack in the nick of time and shook his head under his cloak. Then he looked at the rock wall that the giant salamander had drilled out from. The wall had undergone some renovations, so it could be considered smooth and flat. There weren't any holes that could allow a monster of that size to pass through. There were only a few traces of wetness. It was similar to the wall passing technique. It was a bidirectional distortion of the giant and the semi-void. No, there should be another ability. It looks like you really are a fleshly body. The level of your ability is quite surprising. Wright was still speaking in a slow and unhurried manner like a boss, but the strength he used to grip Yanfun's throat had clearly increased. Luo Nan sighed. You've said so much nonsense. This giant salamander of yours is about to breathe its last. I learned in biology class that the tetrodotoxin contained in the salamander is insoluble in water. If you want to spray a poisonous mist, you probably have to use its acidic bodily fluids to neutralize it. It's hard enough to do this over and over again. Biology class? One is never too old to learn. Wright's gaze roamed over Luo Nan's cloak. He didn't linger on this topic, but who knew what he was thinking? 2 seconds later, Wright returned to communication mode. It was as if hypnotizing Zhang Lu, and to mount a sneak attack and pouring neurotoxin into the room had never happened. This giant salamander doesn't satisfy me. This is why I don't like the karst caves of Spring City. There are far too few mutants here that are suitable to be controlled. At the beginning of the aberration era, this karst cave was one of the first areas to fall into enemy hands. However, because it attracted the most attention, it was cleaned out early on and became the isolation zone between Spring City and the wilderness. Then it was filled with people like Zhang Lu, and had already fainted due to massive bleeding, pain, and fear, so he couldn't hear this evaluation. Wright only said it casually, and the focus of the topic quickly jumped to Zhang Lu, Anne's wife. Maybe tetrodotoxin is useless to you, but I really want to know, can you stop this lady from absorbing the same toxin? In the previous experiments, my control of the dosage was relatively accurate, but seeing you here, it's too difficult for me to control the dosage in milligrams. Of course, it's not easy to control the power in your hands. On the bed, Yanfun's face had already turned purple, and she began to convulse due to a severe lack of oxygen. The neurotoxin had already weakened her ability to breathe, and now that lighter was clutching her throat, all of her breathing channels had been cut off. She was about to reach her limit. Luo Nan obviously knew that this was a threat, but he didn't immediately respond. It seemed that he was weighing the pros and cons. Wright maintained his smile. Why don't we get to the bottom of things? Just who are you? What's your relationship with the Xia Luo cult? I haven't seen you in the data, and you don't seem to fit in with this sort of low-level cult that holds a tattered cloak like a treasure. Are you Wu Jun's friend? Lover? Mercenary? I see injustice on the road, and I draw my blade to help. Is that okay? That's a really annoying answer. Okay, I also feel that there's too much nonsense between us. But right now I hold the initiative. You should answer. What are you going to do? Your mission has failed, and you're still asking me what to do? Luo Nan leaned against the wall to the side of the door and chatted with Wright. He casually said a few words of mockery. You can't get hold of Boss Jun's weakness, and the rebels who cooperated with you have all been annihilated. Aside from grabbing a woman's throat and showing off, what other use do you have? If I were your boss, I would certainly deduct your entire year's salary and funds. Then I'd say, don't let me see you again. That would vent my anger. This was an imitation of Zhang Yingying's tone of voice. Though it was usually quite noisy, the effect here was quite decent. The smile on Wright's face remained unchanged, but his eyes grew colder and colder. He was angry. Of course, the more convincing reason was that his preparations in the Abyss region were more or less complete. Hypnotizing Zhang Lu, and releasing poison, forcing an awkward conversation. Perhaps Wright really wasn't a combat-type ability user, but his brain was still quite good. He had completed a complex set of multiple layers of cover in this tense atmosphere. He had used this trump card that might have been excessively heavy. Unfortunately, it was still too slow. Luo Nan snapped his fingers. This sort of cliché to the point of explosion still fit his aesthetic standards. However, he had forgotten that he was wearing a disguise glove on his hand. His posturing had failed, so he could only let out a muffled fart on his fingertips. He was extremely embarrassed for a time. Fortunately, he hadn't used the snap of his fingers as a signal. Moreover, he had successfully attracted Wright's attention. Even if it was only for an instant, it was enough to distract Wright. It was at this moment that the long flat tail of the giant salamander, which had been disliked, suddenly swung rapidly from a position close to the ground. It was like a steel blade scraping across the ground. Wright lost his balance amidst the strange sound of flesh and bone being torn apart. His brain hadn't reacted in time. He had partially overlooked this change, so much so that he still had a smile on his face. Then his entire smiling face became crooked due to the tilt of his body. His instinctive reactions surpassed the speed of his thinking in the next moment. Wright's right hand instinctively exerted force, wanting to snap Yenfen's throat. However, he didn't feel anything at all. He transmitted his thoughts over, but his entire right arm didn't receive the feedback it should have. Wright's eyes weren't enough. His eyes had just dropped to his feet when they slanted to his right arm. Therefore, from the corner of his eye, he glanced at the foot that had been completely dislocated and the ankle that was only left with bone stubble and rotten flesh. The focus of his eyes was an even more bizarre scene. His right arm had been separated from his body from the elbow. There wasn't any blood splashing out, only the instantly decaying flesh and skin structure. It was like mycelium spores that scattered and fluttered in the air. Ah! Amidst his hoarse roar, the right arm that had been separated from his body actually made a slight reaction. It was more like the final spasm of his broken nerves and muscles due to the residual force. It flipped Yenfen's body from a flat position to a sideways position, almost pulling him off the bed. He had enough strength, but he had used it in the wrong direction. Due to the change in his posture, Yenfen's effective field of vision rapidly expanded. He finally saw the intense and bloody scene on the other side of the bed. Very quickly, another ruthless stroke was added to the scene. Wright had lost a leg, and the force exerted on his upper body was also dislocated. Naturally, he lost his balance and fell to the side. He bounced off the edge of the bed and fell to the ground. The giant salamander, which was very close to him, subconsciously swung its tail again. This time, the long, blade-like tail practically cut through the middle of Wright's chest and abdomen. As it cut through his flesh, fat, fascia, and even organs, it also turned his roar into a muffled moan. In the end, Lake didn't say the latter half of his words. He just used his remaining, blood-splattered left hand to forcefully slap the base of the giant salamander's tail. This should be a forceful signal. In the end, a considerable portion of the giant salamander was still under his control. The body of this thick and sturdy monster, which didn't have any vocal organs, trembled, rubbing against the ground as it charged forward. However, a major problem appeared in its coordination. Its originally vigorous pounce became completely inaccurate. It swayed left and right, like a car that had lost control. With a crash, it scraped against the door frame and half the wall as it charged into the living room. Then came the noise of an enormous struggle. The safety of the people lying on the ground in disorder outside was worrying. Wright lay on the ground, looking at this scene in astonishment. Soon, his gaze returned to the shadow of Luo Nan's hood. 2 seconds later, he spoke with a hoarse voice. "How did you do it?" "It's as I said before." "Fire god ant," Luo Nan indicated for Wright to shift his gaze to look at the ant-type mutant that was crawling on the ground amidst the bloodstains. These were 2 large ants the size of a thumb. They had just fallen off the giant salamander's body and were crawling towards the group of their own kind. And the number of fire god ants on the giant salamander's body was over 10 times greater. "Fresh delivery. I just got them." Luo Nan swept a glance at Reiwen, who was in the shadows in the corner. He revealed a smile that Wright couldn't see. You control and induce the salamander's instincts and basic thoughts. The fire god ant controls its central nervous system. You make the salamander view me as an enemy, and I use it to perform a set of simple actions. Back and forth. It's very fair. Wright stared blankly at the fire god ant crawling in his bloodstains. Where's the ant queen? You're talking about controlling the ant queen. No matter what, the ant queen is on the mental side. She's also the axis of collective consciousness. It doesn't matter where she is. You just need to control the signal from a remote relay. Controlling the ant queen. Wright discovered that he didn't understand Luo Nan's explanation, but he could feel that it was a matter of course. Controlling a nest of fire god ants. Then I'll observe and experiment. I'll do a few more rounds. That's all. Luo Nan really was a matter of course. On the plane of reality, controlling a nest of mutants and controlling the corresponding population was still a shocking bomb that could blow up the academic world, the inner world, and even the wider domain. Not to mention anything else, just relying on this topic alone was enough to support a large laboratory and publish hundreds of high-quality theses. Then he could rely on citations and honor points to eat for a lifetime. With this kind of experimental foundation, it wasn't strange for him to do anything. Wright's lips and teeth opened and closed. He was barely able to turn his weak breath into speech. There was also a hoarse and strange laughter. Yes. You're more professional than me. But you won't be in every domain. His voice had completely broken at the end, but the energy of Wright's entire body was chaotic and restless. It was as if a fire had been ignited in the depths of his bones and muscles. Oh, the abyssal region's configuration was still there. Chapter 719. Wright's own aura was practically overturned, yet the abyssal region's configuration remained unchanged. Clearly, it wasn't based on Wright's will. It was borrowing some sort of external force. But in order to borrow power, one's body needed to have a basic levering power. Wright, who had entered a dying state, had chosen to burn himself. Under the state of flames, the macromolecules that formed the human body would become especially excited. They would decompose into atoms and then rapidly undergo all sorts of chemical reactions. They would be pieced together into carbon dioxide, water vapor, or something else. At the same time, substances with higher melting points and boiling points would be left behind. Of course, Wright wasn't truly burning right now. Or perhaps it could be said that what was burning was not his body, but his soul. Even the virtual brain system had never made a clear definition of the essence of the soul. But from the perspective of a cultivator, their core, which needed to be stable and firm, suddenly underwent a phase change. What it displayed seemed to be no different from the laws of the material world. The soul burned and released heat. Moreover, it reacted with the other components of the surrounding environment to recombine into a new structure. Once a reaction occurred, the result of the reconstruction would be irreversible. Luo Nan watched as Wright's burning soul fused with certain components of the abyssal region storm. Wright's burning soul fused with a completely different form to fill the precise configuration. The precision of this configuration far exceeded the limits of what a B-mental side could control. But after paying the price of burning his soul, the results were immediate. The power of the torrential storm that was stirred up instantly increased by over 5 times. And as the boundary of the burning continued to penetrate inward, Wright lost even more of the essence of his soul. But the power he could control grew stronger and stronger. This sort of burning certainly followed a special rule framework. Only then could the released energy operate in a more effective manner. It didn't scatter and dissipate without any meaning. It was a bit like an altar. Luo Nan subconsciously compared his own altar framework with it. The more he looked, the more similarities there were. This was indeed a configuration system similar to a sacrificial order. It was just that it was more cruel and violent. And judging from Luo Nan's theory of being a tool type and a plant type, it clearly belonged to the latter. Luo Nan quietly leaned against the wall. His gaze penetrated the barrier of the material world to observe the complex state of the abyssal region. The system of this order is huge. It has a developed root system that covers a wide area through the abyssal region. However, it obviously has a more complicated hierarchy and even authority settings. Wright shouldn't belong to the upper echelons of the system because the power he borrows only comes from the tip of the root system. Or perhaps it's just the humus soil that's affected by the roots and fallen leaves. Hey, no matter what, Wright was still a B-rank psychic. Regardless of which organization he was in, he should be in the middle or upper echelons. If even he was only in the periphery, then wouldn't the core strength of this order be at the top? Luo Nan's eyes blinked a few times. It was at this moment that Wright raised his blood-stained left hand. The color of the blood and the wound on the skin of his palm that had just been torn apart rapidly formed a distorted and deformed figure. The power of chi and blood and the storm of the abyss area converged at the center of the palm. The air pressure in the room was clearly rising rapidly. Due to the uneven distribution between the areas, an invisible whirlpool was formed. Since it was already like this in the real world, the storm in the abyss zone became even more agitated. The mental side, or at least the mental side below the level of an extraordinary, would find it several times more difficult to temporarily construct a structure in such an environment. In other words, Luo Nan had lost the initiative on the level of combat. Wright's lips parted to reveal a warped smile. The pain of having his stomach split open made him lose interest in talking. He was already impatient to reap the pleasure of an extreme counterattack. Luo Nan furrowed his brows. He noticed that there was another indescribable "I" behind Wright's bloodshot and turbid eyes. It was slowly opening amidst the torrential storm of the abyss zone. There was a bit of error in his previous judgment. The order system that Wright belonged to still possessed a flexible method of setting up the level of authority. Perhaps Wright was only able to use the humus soil in the beginning, but as the level of the sacrifice increased, so much so that the influence of the event itself could still touch the main body of the root system to continue increasing its power. At this very moment, that bewitching was releasing light and absorbing light. It stirred the abyss zone and reorganized information within the chaotic storm in order to understand the various changes in the state of affairs of this side of the world. This was also a process of awakening of authority. The greater the matter, the greater the effort. Luo Nan sighed in response to this. Tonight has already been full of accidents. Now that a big guy has jumped in, it's really hard to clean things up. It's best if we don't meet for now. What the hell are you talking about? Wright's words were squeezed out from between his teeth. Luo Nan's incomprehensible words and the casual attitude he displayed were far more painful than the lacerations on his hands and feet and the wounds on his chest and abdomen. His current sorry appearance made it impossible for him to assume a calm posture. He could only use even more violent methods to wash away the humiliation of his crushing defeat and heavy injuries. His lips opened and closed as he chanted the incantation of sacrifice. The secret sound resonated with the mental and material planes to hypnotize his own body. He did his best to match the gradually awakening level of power in the abyss zone. Then he used his broken fleshly body as a guide, disregarding the consequences, to form the most lethal attack. Wright's voice rose, the eye of all souls that pierces through the heavens. There was a sudden click in the air. It was as if an invisible finger had turned off an invisible air switch. At the same time, the abyss zone's sacrificial configuration was like a slanted fort piled up by children on a beach. It didn't even have to endure the frontal impact of the waves. It collapsed with a rumble because of a small vibration. The abyss zone's slowly opened eye of all souls was like a sand painting. It warped beyond recognition in the blink of an eye. Wright's eyes widened, but soon, the fragile water crystals exploded from the recoil force. The powerful force that the abyss zone had just gathered then collapsed mercilessly devoured him. The humus of the order was originally on the periphery, so it didn't matter if it received the attack. However, Wright, who was close at hand, seemed to have a bomb placed in his skull and his internal organs. Blood sprayed out from his 7 orifices at the same time, especially his eyeballs. His already cracked chest and abdomen sprayed out a mist of blood and pieces of internal organs. They were spun by the vortex of air, covering most of the room. As for Wright himself, he was a bloody mess. It was hard to call him human. It was also at this moment that Yenfen, who was on the bed, obtained strength from who knows where. She used her hoarse voice to let out a shout filled with delight. Luo Nan shot a glance in that direction. Actually, he himself was within the range of the blood that sprayed out. However, he couldn't care about these details at this time. He slowly walked forward amidst the chaotic vortex of air that had lost its order. He walked to Wright's side, who was already breathing more than he was breathing. Though Wright's sacrificial configuration was destroyed, Luo Nan wasn't happy to see the chaotic storm that surged and devoured him on the level of the Abyss Zone. People needed to finish what they started. Luo Nan didn't forget that the surroundings of Spring City were filled with the hounds of Quantum Corporation. This group of people were all nervous. If by any chance the other side really did follow the trail, then it would become a seesaw. They would push down one end and raise the other end. They clearly wanted to help, but they would give the other side even more trouble. I need to clear the channel. Luo Nan needed to promptly release the flood before the turbulent storm of the Abyss Zone broke through the threshold of alertness. It would be best if he could erase all traces. Of course, this was much more difficult than destruction. It was like kicking away several thousand building blocks that had already been constructed into a castle. Then, the building blocks would follow the order they were arranged in before they were sealed, falling neatly back into the box. Let Right return to Right, and let Evil Eye return to Evil Eye. Everything would be like it had never happened. For months ago, Luo Nan could forget about doing this even if he squeezed out all of his brain juice. Luckily, Luo Nan had been facing the Cloud Labyrinth for the past few months, which was far more complicated than the situation before his eyes. In that harsh environment, it was like building blocks or a jigsaw puzzle. He tried to reassemble the billions of pieces of the structure and form a complete logic. This was the repeated strengthening of the basic concept of configuration construction. Luo Nan categorized the configuration fragments into different categories. He used the theory of the virtual brain system as a benchmark to sort them out one by one. From the most basic number, size, weight, and height, it gradually rose to the balance and symmetry between the various parts. It even reached the structural relationship between the parts and the whole. Aside from theory, there was also practice. Just the priority of interference control was like calligraphy. The use of the brush, the structure, the technique of composition, and the technique of ink were all carefully divided. They could be divided into several dozen major and minor items. All of them needed to be diligently practiced and corrected from time to time. Luo Nan's accumulation of soul strength was vigorous and peerless. Otherwise, with the intensity of his practice, just the enormous consumption and the backlash from the shattering of the configuration would be enough to kill a normal ability user 1,000 times over. With such a rich reserve of experience, Luo Nan looked at Wright's crude method of construction once more. He really had a wonderful sense of superiority, like a reborn elementary school student. Not to mention the fact that he had just witnessed the entire process of the sacrificial configuration from nothing to something. It was built step by step. It was tantamount to having a standard answer first. All that was left was to test his memory. Even if he didn't, he would be able to see the shattered configuration fragments. He would be able to complete the dismantling and restoration work according to the laws and principles of the virtual brain system. He could also explore the rationality of the details in passing. The work was completed 3 seconds later. The air vortex formed by the imbalance of air pressure within the room was smoothed out. The fluttering cloak calmed down as well. It streaked across Wright's body and face, making his body appear faintly discernible under the lights of the room. Light and shadow instantly intersected, and a visible change occurred to Wright's ruined body. His twisted and shattered body suddenly became orderly. Even though his limbs were still incomplete, his figure could already be clearly discerned. Even the blood, flesh, and internal organ fragments that filled the air were gathered and pieced together by incorporeal hands. They were reassembled. At least on the surface, they were reassembled. This was like a bloody and splendid magic trick. In fact, the mutual interference between the mental and material planes was like a magic designed by the creator. Chapter 720. Luo Nan could more or less understand the reason for Yen Fen's shocked and pale expression. After all, this sort of phenomenon, similar to the reversal of time and space, was quite frightening from a visual perspective. But it was a pity that this was only an illusion. This relatively complete body was merely a temporary carrier to collect Wright's chaotic collapse of energy. The complex and precise functions of the human body were ultimately not building blocks. It was impossible for Luo Nan to bestow a new life force to the already shattered cellular tissues. This already exceeded the limits of the domain that his soul strength could reach. At most, he could only give Yen Fen and even Wright the illusion that he was mostly mistaken. And it was precisely this tiny domain constructed from this illusion that still allowed the flow of consciousness and cognition. It even allowed the body to make the tiniest of minute reactions. Within this tiniest of minute limits, Wright's remnant consciousness and his incomplete body blended together. It was like a spark beneath a whirlwind of ashes. Though it was tiny, it was still bright. Wright miraculously retained a single breath. This also allowed him to personally experience the marvelous taste of his body disintegrating and reassembling, of his soul burning and reassembling. This was truly the life and death of a person. It followed a majestic and powerful will. It suddenly died and suddenly existed, treading back and forth on the boundary between life and death. And all of this was led by the furnace before his eyes. No, it was the master. He did his best to widen his eyes. The dim light of the outside world penetrated through the shattered and reassembled crystal. It spurred on the cone cells and a series of subsequent nerve reflexes, combining the fuzzy information of the outside world with the imaginary illusions in his brain. It made this demon, who was already destined to die, let out the most pious sigh of his entire life. Oh God! The temporarily reassembled soul was annihilated. The reformed body collapsed and dissolved like a pile of mud. It also completely digested the impact force of the abyssal storm, turning the intense turbulence of the abyssal plane into nothingness. This was undoubtedly an extremely cruel way to die. But before Wright completely disintegrated, his vocal cords vibrated. A weak force pushed through the layers of conduction in the air molecules, transmitting the sigh that was rich with emotions in time. Though the range of influence didn't even exceed a diameter of 3 meters, it was already enough for Luo Nan and Yen Fen to hear it. Was this a god? A certain someone's requirements were really low. Luo Nan shook his head slightly. He wasn't as ignorant as Wright. The virtual brain system involved configuration, dynamo core, and all sorts of other deep theories. Luo Nan still didn't fully understand them. He stumbled and stumbled when putting them into practice. He could only advance at a tortoise speed within the labyrinth of clouds and mist. And from his perspective of experience, it was just a brilliant sun wheel within an abyss. The might that came from the endless void was immeasurable. With such a comparison, if he were a god, the power system of this universe would probably collapse immediately. In the end, it was just an overly delusional delusion of an ignorant person. This was what Luo Nan thought, but Yen Fen, who was lying on the bed, quivered and her entire face swelled red. At that moment, she was still under the influence of the nerve agent. Her limbs were numb, and it was difficult for her to control them. She could only barely move her vocal cords to spell out 2 words between hiccups and chuckles. Luckily, Luo Nan's ears were good. After Yen Fen repeated it several times, he was finally able to make out the words clearly. Cloak, cloak. Hey, a cloak is different from a cloak. Of course, Luo Nan knew that what Yen Fen said wasn't the literal meaning, but now wasn't the time to get to the bottom of it. From his perspective, finding the right nerve agent treatment method and antidote was more difficult than anything he had done before. His gaze turned to the door of the damaged room. There, the Vulcan ant was controlling the giant salamander to stagger back. Treat a dead horse as if it were alive. No, the one who started the trouble needs to untie it. Whether or not tonight's matter would have a good ending would depend on whether or not this old saying filled with empiricism would be useful. Reality proved that Luo Nan's luck wasn't bad. It was just as Dead Ghost Right had said. He didn't add too much nerve agent to Yenfun. Yenfun herself had a rather powerful fleshly body. Her bodily functions were much stronger than a normal person's. After stopping the continuous injection of the nerve agent, Luo Nan assisted her in combing her neural network, and she slowly recovered. When she was barely able to move, Yenfun struggled to get down to the ground. She practically threw herself at Luo Nan's feet. She didn't care about the filth and bloodstains on the ground. She gave a heavy kowtow. There weren't any words of thanks coming out of her mouth. Instead, she piously kissed the corner of Luo Nan's cloak. Was this a custom of some vagrant tribe or their Xie Luo cult? When in Rome, do as the Romans do. Perhaps it could be said that Luo Nan maintained the principle of acting cool. Luo Nan resisted his instinct to avoid it and accepted it. Yenfun gave another kowtow after completing the ceremony. Then she staggered to her feet. She practically used her hands and feet to arrive at a corner of the room. Zhang Lu, who had fallen into a semi-conscious state due to massive blood loss, lay there. Yenfun didn't say a word from beginning to end. She just used her trembling hands to feel around Zhang Lu An's body. Soon, she pulled out a dagger from the leather sheath at Zhang Lu An's waist. This should be the weapon that Zhang Lu An normally used. He didn't have the time to use it when he attacked Luo Nan, but now Yenfun had it in her hands. Without any hesitation, Yenfun stabbed the dagger straight into Zhang Lu An's perfectly fine left shoulder socket. Luo Nan's eyebrows jumped when he saw this, but he didn't seem to have the qualifications to say anything since his feet were a bloody mess. Zhang Lu An woke up from the pain and screamed loudly. But when his eyes reflected the pale and distorted face of his wife, it was as if his throat had been cut open. Only the hissing sound of air leaking could be heard for a time. Yenfun pressed the weight of her entire body onto the dagger. The edge of the dagger had long since pierced through Zhang Lu An's shoulder socket, stabbing into the ground below. She was very close to Zhang Lu An and her husband. She was practically speaking right next to their ears. "Tell me, why did you do this? Hiss. Let go. Let go." Zhang Lu An finally remembered to speak, but he begged for mercy from the torment of the pain. His thick and sturdy body spasmed and twitched as he rubbed against the ground. "Tell me why." Yenfun's voice was weak. It was as if she could lose her voice at any time. But the enormous tension of her emotions bombarded Zhang Lu An's heart with the piercing edge of the dagger. Zhang Lu An wriggled and struggled on the ground to no avail. He could only scream with all his might, "The Xieluo order is about to be finished. I told you before. Right is a member of the Amaterasu order. The Amaterasu order. The strongest of the three great orders. There's no hope for us if we're targeted by them." No hope? The breath in Yenfun's throat trembled. It was hard to tell whether she was crying or laughing. "There's no hope for us if we're targeted. You want to sell everyone? Weren't you the ones who insisted on putting on airs?" Blood gushed out of Zhang Lu An's shoulder like a fountain. Blood flowed endlessly from his severed arm as well. His willpower had almost completely collapsed. Tears and snot flowed from the dignified and imposing man's eyes. He was in so much pain that he couldn't even reply for a time. Yenfun didn't need to reply either. She was just venting her emotions. "It's you. You used the survival of the tribe as an excuse to push Wu Jun to the top. She's not a member of the tribe. She's just a postgraduate student stranded in the wilderness. She's still pregnant. She was about to return to the city to give Polio a better environment. It's you. You forced her to the top. Huh, it's because of the cloak, right? Because she's the only operator in the base who has mastered this technique." Once again, Yenfun twisted the dagger in her hand. Zhang Lu An screamed even louder. His waist and legs twisted. He tried desperately to shake Yenfun off, but it was all in vain. In the end, he just gave up and shouted, "So what? She should have given me the cloak long ago." "Give it to you? Didn't she want to return to the city? After returning to Spring City, She could have left if she wanted to, but she refused to let go of the position. Those stubborn idiots really treated her like a priest. Fine, even if she was a priest, what did she do? All she did was enchantment. 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 These childish tricks might have been useful in the wilderness, but they're in a big city now. There are so many powerful people in the government, the military, the association, and the church. Enchantment is useless. Give me power, power. Zhang An's face was purple, and his veins were bulging. He screamed at the top of his lungs, "Since she's a priest, isn't it reasonable for her to give power to her believers? If she can't even do that, how can she start a religion? How can she call herself a god?" Yanfen screamed back, "We never did that." However, Zhang An was purely venting at this time. He only roared in his own logic, that bullsh** cloak is simply the nonsense of a crazy old man. Only those stubborn fools would worship it as if it were a god and promote it wantonly. Now, the Amaterasu sect is here. They asked for it and they got it. Why should I die with them? Of course, I have to sell it for a good price. Yanfen stared at the man beneath her. She stared at her husband and squeezed out the words through her teeth, "You're shameless." Only a useless god is shameless. Zhang Luwen pushed his head back. He didn't even care about the wound on his shoulder as he scolded, "Useless, unqualified. Compared to a real church, you're just trash that can't do anything. It's trash like this that has delayed me for so many years. My talent and youth have been ruined by this trash, and I still have to struggle in the cave like a worm. To hell with the cloak, to hell with the loyalty." His voice suddenly changed tone, mixing with the sound of his throat, skin, fascia, and bones being cut open. Yanfen pulled out her knife and slit her husband's throat. The airflow and gurgling blood drained the last bit of Zhang An's vitality and ambition. At the same time, she used up the last bit of her strength. Chapter 721. From 6 to 7 o'clock a.m., the simulated sky lighting was adjusted to its brightness. With the support of electricity, the ventilation system sent a cool breeze that brushed against the child's face. The slight light and touch triggered Polio's biological clock. He blinked and woke up from his sleep. His face was wrinkled. The warm and hard metal arm had left a few marks on his face, and it was bumpy to the touch. His neck wasn't comfortable either. How did I sleep last night? The grogginess from waking up couldn't subside. Polio felt that his head was swaying left and right, and he was going to fall down at any moment. Should I sleep for a while? Oh, it's better not to. I seem to have forgotten something, and it's a terrible memory. He rubbed his eyes with his left hand and rummaged through his blurry memory. The room door knocked twice before it was pushed open. "Polio, today's breakfast is egg porridge. Wash up quickly before it gets cold." "Oh, I understand, Aunt Fun." Polio shook his head and propped himself up from the floor. His memory surfaced. His mother was away, and Aunt Fun delivered breakfast every morning. It was mealtime and then, Aunt Fun. Polio jumped up and chased after her. Yanfen turned around and caught Polio, who was like a cannonball. After physical contact, the ridiculous distance between the dream and reality was bridged. Polio's heart was pounding, and he lifted his head nervously to size up Fun. In his eyes, Aunt Fun's face was still fine, but there was an obvious strangulation mark on her neck, and her complexion was also very pale. These details shattered the illusion of a peaceful daily life, and made everything in the surroundings quickly become real. Polio remembered the previous night, the submarine escape, the accident, and Mr. Furnace. He wept beside Furnace, the magical charging, and his confession. All sorts of scenes flashed past his mind, and he linked them together. It was supposed to be a prelude to a battle. Polio was prepared to fight, but, Aunt Fun, did you see Mr. Furnace? Yanfen smiled and gave Polio a peck on his cheek. Then she placed her cheek behind his head and said softly, "Of course, I saw him. Thanks to your help, I didn't delay your breakfast." "Don't play it down." Polio grumbled loudly. He could smell the scent of blood and medicine on Aunt Fun's body. Her injuries weren't light. Yanfen smiled and looked at Polio as she said, I'm sorry, but that's the truth. Polio looked down on the behavior of treating him like a child, but he couldn't do anything to Aunt Fun. He could only compromise and ask, "Where's Mr. Furnace?" Mr. Smelter had something to do and left first. He also drove the off-road vehicle in the exhibition hall. Sheng Hui, 28 points. Polio remembered that the off-road vehicle was a souvenir assembled by his mother. Though it was priced, it wasn't for export. Oh, Mr. Furnace mentioned it last night. But what does 28 points mean? I might as well just drive away. Polio felt that the logic of an adult was ridiculous. It diluted his focus on the series of unknown events last night. Yenfen used other factors to distract him. Before leaving, Mr. Furnace gave you a gift and asked me to pass it to you. It's a pity that it's too big, so I can't carry it up. You'll have to go down and take a look. Polio went downstairs in a daze and arrived at the exhibition hall. The powerful and domineering hand-assembled off-road vehicles were no longer there, but the shop didn't feel empty because there was a large number of hand-assembled off-road vehicles. Another gigantic fellow occupied the original spot. It was a thick reptile with 4 limbs and a long tail. Its head and neck were one and the same. Its grayish-black skin looked smooth and seemed to be wrapped in a layer of water film. There were yellowish-green round spots and protrusions on its skin. The color contrast was very strong. Is this a salamander? It's so big. Polio recognized the commonly seen amphibian in the karst cave. Its body was too big. Its head and body were about 2 meters long, and its flat tail was about the same length as the rest of its body. It was a huge creature that was about 4 meters long. With Polio's small body, he wouldn't be visible even if he was swallowed. Yenfen confirmed, it's a giant salamander. It's a mutant that lives in the karst cave waterway. Is this the gift? Mr. Lava is a beast tamer? Polio didn't dare to believe it. This large creature exceeded his expectations and understanding of gifts. He didn't care about what happened last night. He widened his eyes and sized up the giant salamander. He wanted to touch it, but Yenfen stopped him. This creature has a bad temper. Your small arms and legs won't be able to touch it. Wear this. As she spoke, Yenfen placed a translucent leather ring and metal bracelet on the wrist of Polio's mechanical right arm. Though the combination of the leather band and metal was strange, the size of the bracelet was made according to the interface of the mechanical arm. It fitted perfectly and didn't affect the functions of the mechanical arm. Polio sized up the new accessory curiously and discovered a small creature crawling inside the translucent leather band. It was a fiery red ant, a real living creature. It was crawling in the hollow tunnel of the leather band. Polio didn't know how it was sealed in. It was interesting, but it was also confusing. Put in your thoughts. That's what Mr. Furnace said. Yenfen's tone was rhythmic as though she was reciting a poem. Though we have to work hard to operate the mechanical arm without electricity, we can start from the basics. With her voice and Polio's focused gaze, the ants crawling in the leather bracelet seemed to have received a signal, and their movement stopped. At the exhibition platform, the giant salamander, who was lying lazily on the ground, suddenly lifted its head and twisted its body. Its bulging eyeballs rotated as it looked in the direction of Polio and Polio. Polio and Polio stared at each other. Polio held his breath and exclaimed, "Wah!" Using the chain configuration to link the individual brainwaves with the sensory organs of a single Vulcan ant. Then, through the condensation ring's global sensor network, it will connect with the Vulcan ant population. Simplified operating instructions and related interfaces have been added in the middle. It can partially realize intelligent operation, allowing idiots to operate. There are no problems with the basic idea, but it takes up a bit more resources and harasses the manipulator behind the scenes. After all, it's not like watching a child. I can optimize it further in the future. Luo Nan's brain operated at high speeds. He went over the design model of the present that Midnight had drafted in his mind once more to make sure that there were no obstructions. And from the feedback from the sensor network, Polio was having a lot of fun. Everyone was to their liking. Everything was perfect. Of course, this was just an embellishment after a series of tense events. It was a way of taking care of the cute little fellow. What Luo Nen truly needed to pay attention to was the entire plot thread he discovered last night. The Order of Justice and the Eye of Secret Contract were listed as one of the 3 great secret orders of the Amaterasu Order. Why would they be interested in the so-called holy relic of the Pheasant Order, something that even their own believers looked down upon? If this piece of information were to be sold, it would be enough for the various intelligence teams to give out month-end incentives. But what Luo Nan paid the most attention to in this entire thread was, Luo Nan, are you seriously listening to Teacher Li's words? Luo Nan shuddered. Only now did he come back to his senses. He noticed the people around him and the place they were in. Mrs. Luo Shuqing's gaze was stern. Her expression was furious as she sat on the sofa in the advisor's office. 2 meters away was the master of this office, Acumen College's dedicated advisor for the 10th grade, Mr. Li Mingde. Luo Nan himself stood across from the coffee table with the identity of a student who had committed a crime, receiving an education. However, his mind had been wandering outside the heavens just now. Old Immortal Mingde's words didn't even enter his ears. They were blocked out cleanly. It's fine. It's fine. A young man's mind is quick-witted. His imagination is rich. A moment of distraction is nothing. And I understand student Luo Nan's personality. I'm worried that he's overthinking things. Li Mingde gently twirled the grizzled beard beneath his chin. This retro style suited his appearance quite well. It really did give him the air of a sage. If the cold sweat on his forehead was a bit less, then it would be even more perfect. Luo Shuqing bowed once more to express her apology. Teacher Li, Luo Nan has really caused you trouble during this time. Li Mingde chuckled. He was just about to continue the previous topic when Luo Nan's gaze shot over. The back of his neck turned slightly cold and he shook his head vigorously on the spot. No, no, no. This child, Luo Nan, is publicly acknowledged by our Academic Affairs Division. He's smart and precocious. He's quite different from ordinary children. This is a factor of his personality and IQ. It has nothing to do with how he conducts himself. You see, he doesn't have many friends in his age group. But he has a lot in common with his upperclassmen and the elites outside the school. That scoundrel Xie Junping has given him quite a few rotten ideas. Hu Huaying comes over every day to clean up his mess. The second generation of the construction society gnashes their teeth in anger at the mention of him. The Mystic Arts Research Society is directly surrounded by him. He brings bodyguards to the school and he openly flirts with society girls. All of you parents really don't know this. Li Mingde's hand exerted strength and broke 2 strands of his beard. His lower jaw and heart twitched twice, but in the end, he maintained the demeanor of a teacher. Mrs. Luo, we can't use ordinary eyes to look at special talents. Student Luo Nan has participated in many activities in this school year. He has also obtained outstanding results. Actually, this is something that the school and us teachers are happy to see. Luo Shuqing revealed a courteous and dignified smile to conceal her awkward and complex emotions. Perhaps Li Mingde saw through it, or perhaps he was completely indifferent. He just continued to speak according to the established plan. But in today's era of authority, one accepts the convenience of intelligence and also bears the restrictions of intelligence. In this way, some rules that are very suitable for ordinary people are used to treat geniuses. That's right, it's a student with extraordinary talent like Luo Nan. These rules often appear rigid and unreasonable. The school also hopes to find a plan that satisfies both sides. Student Luo Nan's special talent will be preserved to the greatest degree while finding a suitable and compliant space for him. Therefore, we discussed for a bit. Perhaps Mrs. Luo, as his guardian, can be flexible and jump out of the boundaries of linear thinking. Luo Shuqing took a deep breath. What do you mean? Chapter 722. By the time the aunt and nephew left the office building, the golden-red rays of the late spring setting sun had already traversed more than half of the campus. The rays were cast from the angle between the North Shore jungle and the long river, casting a thick film of light over the bright green wetland vegetation. Luo Nen slightly narrowed his eyes. His gaze pierced through the layer of sunlight that ordinary people would find hard to look directly at. He swept his gaze over the movement and changes within the campus. He wasn't observing. He just had nothing to do. Mrs. Luo Shuqing didn't say a single word for an entire 3 minutes after leaving Li Mingda's office. She just walked forward in the corridor, in the elevator, and in the vast campus. It was as if she had completely forgotten the existence of her nephew. Okay, she was really angry this time. Luo Nen reckoned that he was probably the only child of the Luo family in 3 generations to have been recommended by the school authorities to take a leave of absence from school. Taking a leave of absence from school was just a polite way of saying it. Retaining the school credits, hours, honor, and so on and so forth didn't change the essence of having to repeat a year. Without a doubt, this was the vile incident of being hung from a beam and ruthlessly whipped. Luo Nen really didn't know what to say. He had the help of Xie Junping and Hu Huaying, 2 super tinkers with connections that reached the heavens, but he still couldn't make up for the lowest standard of absenteeism at Acumen College. He had really been too arrogant these past few months. Perhaps he should start with the SCA and invade the Department of Education system. Luo Nan's mind spun with meaningless thoughts. At the same time, he had no choice but to admit that there was a little bit of relief and delight in the depths of his heart at the very least. If this matter were to really be smashed, then his life would really change. Mrs. Luo Shuqing suddenly stood still in front of him. Luo Nan reacted quickly and stood firm at the same time. His face hung low and his eyebrows lowered, making a terrified and ashamed appearance. Unfortunately, his acting skills were never up to par. Luo Shuqing's heart didn't fluctuate in the slightest. Her tone was flat as well. Do you have a lot of things to deal with over there? Of course Luo Nen knew that the so-called over there referred to the society and even the inner world. Normally at home, this was a topic that everyone was well aware of but tacitly didn't touch upon. Luo Nen really didn't know how to respond when it was suddenly brought up today. Fortunately, Luo Shuqing did not need Luo Nan to make up any more excuses or lies. She had her own observations and judgments. I can guess that you've done quite well over there. Your uncle and I haven't given you any help, but you've been able to drag out the matter of skipping classes until today. And you've done it in this manner. Don't look at your uncle just because he's in the SCA. I'm afraid that even if he sold his old face, he wouldn't be able to do a better job than this. What could Luo Nan say? With great difficulty, he swallowed back the stupid words of, "Aunt, you're too kind." He could only shut his mouth tightly and listen obediently. The problem was that Luo Shuqing only said this and didn't say anything else. Luo Nan wanted to ask, but he didn't dare to. His belly full of suspicions was stifled to the point of being uncomfortable. It wasn't until he walked another 100 steps that he heard his aunt speak softly, "About the suspension, I'll go back and discuss it with your uncle, okay?" When it came to Luo Nan's studies, Mrs. Luo Shuqing had never used such an uncertain tone to converse with him like she did today. Luo Nan was stupefied for a moment. Then he felt the heavy pressure of making a choice. He was actually speechless for a time. The two didn't take the trolleybus. They walked to the underground parking lot. Halfway there, Luo Nan was really unable to resist this overly oppressive atmosphere. He just wanted to say something, but when the words reached his mouth, a sentence suddenly jumped out. "Aunt, do you know of Wu Jun?" "Huh." Luo Nan was a bit regretful as soon as the words left his mouth. The matter that happened to Ling Chen occupied far too much of his brain. Aside from the conflict between the Amaterasu Order and the Xie Luo Order over the Holy Cloak, there were also the words that Luo Nan was extremely sensitive to in the conversation between Yen Fun and Zhang Lu. Things like crazy old man, graduate student, suspension, and so on. Luo Nan couldn't help but think of something. It was just that he knew very little about the events of the past. His interpersonal relationships were even more muddled. He resisted the urge to ask in detail when he was in the karst cave for the sake of maintaining his cool and for the convenience of monitoring in the future. After returning to Xia City, he circled around inside and out. It seemed that his aunt was the only person he could ask a thing or two about. Even so, it wasn't good to mention this, right? Luo Nan was unable to explain the logic behind his question. Luo Shuqing turned to look at him just as he was feeling awkward. Wu Jun. Which Wu Jun? Luo Nan gaped, unable to speak for a time. Was he supposed to say, the priestess of the Xie Luo order? The female owner of the machine modification shop in the black market exchange in the U-Hole far away in Spring City? Luckily, his current thinking speed far exceeded that of normal people. He immediately captured the astonished emotions behind his aunt's words. So he was just stifled for a moment before he quickly asked back. I'm talking about that graduate student. Luo Nan deliberately blurred out a few words in the middle. In the end, he ended with accurate and truthful information. Reality proved that his methods were very successful. Mrs. Luo Shuqing immediately filled in the blanks with her imagination. Her brows furrowed slightly. You saw Wu Jun? When did she return to Xia City? Oh my, there's actually a way. Luo Nan still wanted to confirm things. He spoke cautiously. That Mrs. Wu. She's my grandfather's graduate student. Did she stay in the wilderness for many years? Wu Jun was recommended to your grandfather's laboratory in the year 75, right after your parents. She was only 20 years old at the time. She was still a silly little girl. Where did you see her? Was it a chance encounter, or did she come looking for you? Luo Nan felt that his aunt was quite nervous, and he was suspicious. Was it because she knew of Wu Jun's current identity? Or was there some other sensitive situation that she didn't want him to know about? Luo Nan pondered in his mind, but he still spoke half-truths and half-lies. I've never seen her before. I just heard about her from someone else's mouth. I just asked in passing. Who told you? It was senior sister Tianxi. She's the one who went on a blind date with third brother Mo Chiu. In the end, it didn't work out. Right now, she's a graduate student of Professor Pan, one of the Institute of Architecture and Design. You seem to have met her some time ago. Luo Shuqing had a bit of an impression. She nodded and let out a breath of relief subconsciously. Indeed. Professor Pan's younger brother, Dr. Panda, helped to evaluate and recommend the group of graduate students that went to the wilderness back then. You're quite familiar with that senior sister Tian. You're even talking about these old matters. Professor Pan likes to talk the most, especially about things related to my mother. Senior sister Tian is influenced by the company she keeps. She usually divulges a bit of information to me. Luo Nan laughed innocently and immediately said, Speaking of which, was that Mrs. Wu always in the wilderness? Back then, our family's laboratory was already gone. What was she doing over there? Luo Shuqing laughed involuntarily. She graduated in 81. When the accident happened in the lab in 83, she had nearly 10 years of work experience. There were many large companies that wanted to recruit her. Really? Right now, Wu Jun didn't look like she was being recruited by a large company. Luo Nan felt that his aunt seemed to be avoiding some information. He immediately asked, You're so clear about this matter. Has Wu Jun always been in contact with our family? We haven't seen each other in many years. Oh? How long has it been? It's been around 6 or 7 years. The last time I saw her was around 90 years ago. Huh? I should be able to remember things back then. How come I don't have any impression of her at all? She doesn't come often. She just comes every 1 or 2 years to see your grandfather and understand his condition. She goes straight to the sanatorium. How could there be such a coincidence? Hey, why do you have so many questions? Do you have bad intentions in your stomach? How could that be? Luo Nan understood that it would be very difficult to get any more information from his aunt for the time being. And the things he knew right now were quite valuable. 90 years. This time period was extremely sensitive to Luo Nan. This was because it was from that year that he began to refer to his grandfather's notes. He began to research formatting theory without any hesitation. It was also in that year that Yen Hong's academic misconduct came to light. Quantum Corporation's Deep Blue platform began its trial operation. Of course, the last time his father showed his face and gave him the flexible e-ink screen with the external neuron was also in the same year. If the time and background were shifted to Wu Jun's side, well, Polio would be around 5 or 6 years old. It was as Yenfen said. Wu Jun was forced to take over when she was pregnant. This should have happened around this time. Luo Nan suddenly stood there stupidly. His mind churned with a rather absurd thought. Then it got out of hand. Wait, wasn't he thinking too much? A human's thought process was like this. A sudden association was able to forcefully knead two matters that were separated by thousands of miles. It was similar to a montage style of editing, forming an inconceivable effect. Luo Nan was currently carrying out an inappropriate association. Before a certain person disappeared, Wu Jun maintained contact with her family. After she disappeared, she didn't come back. At the same time, around the time of her disappearance, Wu Jun became pregnant. Motherf ***. Luo Nan fiercely smacked his forehead. They had already entered the underground parking lot. The sound of this slap was extremely loud and clear in this relatively enclosed space. Luo Shuqing looked at him in astonishment. Luo Nan came to a realization and hurriedly suppressed the absurd thoughts in his mind. He revealed a smile to his aunt. It's nothing. It's nothing. I was just a bit stupid. You really were stupid. Luo Shuqing's anger was finally provoked. She glared at him fiercely and quickly walked to the side of the car. She sat in the driver's seat first. Luo Nan lowered his head and sat in the front passenger seat. He had a remorseful expression. Actually, he had already logged onto the psychic wave network. He used the hexaear to communicate with others. Of course, he could only send a message, urgent. Reply when I see the message. Approximately 2 minutes later, when the car was on the high-speed magnetic track heading home, the other side finally responded, You were in such a hurry that I dropped my test tube. Boss Luo, what are your orders? Bro Octopus, I have a bit of skin tissue from last night. Can we do a paternity test with this? Did you bring hair follicles? I did. That's not a problem. Speaking of which, both of them are? I have the relevant backups at the society. It's better to collect them recently? The other side's message suddenly stopped. A full 10 seconds passed before an emoticon was sent over with a thought. Chapter 723. Nanster, did you kill someone? I didn't. But you messed up. I didn't. Then why did you do a paternity test? I did a paternity test for different mothers. Then it was your dad messing around. Believe it or not, I'll really kill someone. Luo Nan had to endure the wild bombardment of friends and family on the psychic wave network from evening to after dinner. There was also a family meeting about taking a leave of absence from school in the middle. He was mentally and physically exhausted before 9 o'clock. He just wanted to cover his head and sleep when he returned to his room. The aftereffects of the situation continued to spread. According to Bamboo Pole's estimates, by tomorrow morning, news of the proponent of the cage and configuration theory, the mental side genius Professor Luo Nan conducting a secret paternity test and suspected of having an illegitimate child would fill all the major forums, discussion groups, tabloids, and other platforms of the inner world. It would become one of the hottest topics of conversation in the inner world. The culprit, Octopus, was in a stupefied state. He was quite unlucky. When Luo Nan contacted him, he was working as a volunteer in the branch's biological laboratory. He was being exploited. He was so busy that his brain was a bit desensitized. From what he saw at the time, Luo Nan's request was too simple. Any assistant would be able to handle it. So he really did hand this matter over to his assistant. There was even a sampling service. And so, the beautiful and cute Miss Assistant, who had a screw loose in her head and a slightly wide lip structure, was driving to Luo Nan's house when the news completely exploded. In a sense, this was a very serious leak. It was said that He Yuan had dragged Octopus off the laboratory table and thrown him into the interrogation room. Then Octopus used the room as a refuge. He crouched down holding his head and refused to come out. The problem was that Luo Nan was several dozen kilometers away, staring coldly at him. Luo Nan was considering whether or not he should give Octopus a taste of heaven's punishment. In the end, Luo Nan held himself back. He didn't want this big news to get out. He could only force himself to concentrate and think about matters related to the Xia Luo sect. Even though the paternity test results had yet to come out, Luo Nan could confirm that this tiny sect had a very close relationship with his grandfather and the wilderness laboratory of yesteryear. Wu Jun, the high priestess of the church, was his grandfather's graduate student. They had worked together in the laboratory for many years. Even after the accident in the laboratory, they still kept in touch. It was a small order that was closely related to their family. It had endured for so many years, stumbling and stumbling. Not to mention the story behind it, just its existence alone was enough for Luo Nan to pay considerable attention to it. Especially when they were facing a huge problem. It was not just the Amaterasu cult. It seemed like the foundation of their cult was in trouble as well. The cloak. That's right. His grandfather had said the word cloak more than once, but Luo Nan had always believed that the so-called cloak should correspond to the curtains of developer mode on the mental plane. In other words, it was the scene of a myriad of overlapping curtains when Luo Nan first used clairvoyance on the mental plane. So there's a real thing? Luo Nan was truly a bit confused. At the same time, he grew more and more curious. He hated that he couldn't immediately meet First Ablatum Wu Jun and get to the bottom of things. Unfortunately, they had missed the opportunity this time, and according to Yanfen, that person wouldn't be back in a short period of time. TSK, I actually forgot to ask for his contact information. Of course, even if I had asked for it back then, Yanfen probably wouldn't have given it to me. I'm just observing for now. Yanfen will certainly have to give me an explanation after such a huge change happened in my family. But according to her, Wu Jun went to the wilderness and was part of the Order's secret operation. It's basically impossible for her to use a satellite phone, a tool that exposes her target. Communication between the two sides is pretty much cut off. Luo Nan casually grabbed the flexible e-ink screen and wrote and drew on it. He pondered over how to quickly lock onto and contact Wu Jun. The Xia Luo Order might have a method of contacting the extraordinary pathway, but the possibility isn't high. After all, their strength looks quite impressive. Even Yanfen, a high-level existence, only has a C-rank fleshly body. Then I'll just have to use the stupid method. I'll just search the entire world. Where there was demand, there was motivation. Luo Nan knew how difficult it was to advance, and he quickly came up with an action plan with his own characteristics. The virtual brain system has a ready-made algorithm for recognizing facial features. Finding Wu Jun's photo and information is far too easy. I can see it right now. Though it consumes quite a lot of resources, I can treat it as an in-depth training in big data processing. I can still use it when I get back to the Cloud Mist Labyrinth. Oh, I need to use ready-made resources. Wu Jun isn't a vagrant of the wilderness. She's a legal citizen with an account in the social authority system. I can ask Sister Yueyin to help me search for her recent whereabouts. She'll most likely leave traces as long as she passes through a city. But the problem lies in the fact that if Wu Jun is carrying out a secret operation, the possibility of her disguise is quite high. She'll also pay attention to avoid the area covered by authority. A simple search based on facial features and authority won't be very useful. This will be quite troublesome. The characteristics of the form, soul, and energy were the best to touch upon the essence. Luo Nan stopped writing and sighed. Perhaps he was still too anxious. If he continued to toss and turn like this, it would take at least a week. He would consume a large amount of strength every day, and it was very likely that he would do useless work. He didn't forget that the most pressing task right now was to get used to the biochemical reactor he brought back from Spring City as soon as possible. He needed to erase the hidden dangers of the cloud world as soon as possible. Oh, look at what I've drawn. Right now on the flexible e-ink screen, there was a list of simplified steps and keywords to take note of. There was a schematic diagram of the algorithm needed for a global search. There was a basic outline of Wu Jun's store that was being monitored from 2,000 kilometers away. In addition, there were also some lines that outlined a somewhat fuzzy portrait of a person in the center of the drawing interface. This was a woman. She had short hair and a thin face. She wore rather large work clothes. Her body was half squatting and half kneeling in the drawing. She leaned close to the outline of a machine. She even held a repair tool in her hand. She was like a blue-collar worker, but she had a rather weak appearance. The first thing Luo Nan could confirm was that he had never seen this person before. Regardless of appearance or temperament, she was very unfamiliar. But soon he confirmed that this woman who had suddenly appeared in the center of the drawing interface was none other than the Wu Jun he was looking for. How did I draw it? It's like this. Luo Nan quickly came to a realization. This sketch was something he found in an electronic photo frame placed in his bedroom when he was observing Wu Jun's store from afar. Then he unconsciously reproduced it. Luo Nan's work was a bit different when compared to the finalized photo. It looked like there was more meaning to it than in the photo. This didn't seem to be just a result of his black and white art style. Luo Nan was a bit surprised by the results of his own creation. But his current thinking and knowledge were far from what it was like when he first entered the profession. He stared at the sketch drawing and analyzed it in detail for a moment. He was certain in his heart, yes. I specifically talked about this when I was discussing with Mr. Bai and the others about entering dreams, divination, and other psychic techniques. This is the magnetization effect. It was just like how non-magnetic materials could obtain magnetism if they were placed in a strong magnetic field for a long time. A person would also form an effect similar to magnetization if they lived in the environment for a long time. From a rational perspective, the result of magnetization was the hair, fingerprints, utensils, trash, and other traces left behind in the target's life. Outstanding criminal investigators and profilers could use these clues to piece together a relatively complete image. This included emotions, temperament, lifestyle habits, preferences, and so on. But from a psychic's perspective, these objective traces could be absorbed by their special clairvoyance mode, which was filled with personal colors. Then they could be reorganized and restored to a more intuitive image of material and even an answer. The inner world called this the magnetization effect of a spiritual magnetic field. It was a terrible description that was filled with pseudoscience. Luo Nan was more willing to call it the interference of the spiritual core. This was a term he translated from the virtual brain system. It couldn't be called sincere and elegant. And with Wu Jun's situation, she was basically unable to reach the level of Luo Nan and Mrs. Halder, who had formed a clear and distinct core of concept, the level of the spirit binding core. But being able to place everyone under the same standard and conduct a more intuitive comparison was always more in line with the human mode of thinking. It looked like Luo Nan's condition today was quite good. Then it wouldn't be a bad idea to try psychic. In a certain sense, this was a shortcut for Rui Wen to traverse through space. If she could cross over. The digital pen in Luo Nan's hand drew on the flexible screen's work area. He tried to add a new element to this work, a more directional element. Maybe the cloak would be good? It was as if a myriad of curtains crisscrossed and flew in the air before Luo Nan's eyes. They extended into the boundless depths, forming a marvelous scene that Luo Nan jokingly called developer mode. Of course, this scene had a deeper level of meaning, but Luo Nan didn't need to analyze it right now. He just treated it as a kind of creative element, trying to add it to the sketch work that was nearing completion. A clear purpose formed a kind of stimulation, causing Luo Nan's thoughts and emotions to diverge. He connected them in a series of disturbances. An even deeper and more complex scene was excavated from the memories of his brain. At the same time, it was excavated from the 500 million square kilometers of land and sea, the tens of billions of humans, and the tens of billions of species of life. Objective facts, subjective emotions, simple desires, complex thoughts. Everything formed a sea of information that was enough to crash the brain of any powerful individual. Even though Luo Nan had the external neuron to protect his body and the virtual brain system to keep watch, he wouldn't take the risk to do some analysis. He just relied on his intuition and a few willful emotions that were close to his aesthetics. He picked a few characteristic points at random and used them as a foundation to draw a silhouette of the modeled sea of information. The digital pen finally dropped down. In a short few seconds, Wu Jun's portrait, which was already a bit fuzzy in the drawing area, was nearly completely hidden under the shadows of the simulated ink. It was as if it was submerged by the surging waves of the sea under the curtain of night. Chapter 724. Ocean Waves. Ocean. This was a concept with practical significance. Luo Nen used such a marvelous method to grasp the first fragment of rational significance from the intuitive information of the primal chaos. The electronic pen paused for a moment, then it spun on Luo Nan's fingertips. With this spin, the entire world's sensing network of 500 million square kilometers shrunk by a third. The source of information provided by the billions of humans and billions of living beings was cut off by at least half. Of course, what remained was an enormous amount of information. It was mottled and turbid. There were no meaningful details that could be described. But Luo Nan's choice created some sort of direction for them. It was no longer a vast expanse of haze. Instead, it flowed, forming a general direction and trajectory. In this stage, the information directly gathered from the material plane of reality naturally retreated to a supporting position. And the subjective information that went through the perception, thought, and processing of humans and other living beings formed a torrential turbid flow that surged forth. The turbid flow did not flow in the direction of north, south, east, or west. It did not surge up and down. Instead, it followed the special dimension of the human heart. It rushed forward under the relatively restricted external environmental conditions. It was also at this stage that the guiding strength of the virtual brain system's rules toward Luo Nen weakened. The wraith sign in the depths of the void spontaneously leaped out, wantonly swimming within the turbid flow of the human heart. Luo Nan's eyebrows jumped lightly. If this were 4 months ago, he would not have furrowed his brows no matter how the wraith sign leaped. But after discovering the abyssal sun disk, Luo Nen could not help but ponder every time the wraith sign acted spontaneously. Then again, there was no point in pondering. Could Luo Nen shield himself from the influence of the abyssal sun? The answer was no. In reality, Luo Nen had endured the heat conduction of the abyssal sun disk every moment of the past 4 months. Although he would ignore this heat conduction most of the time due to the difference in degree, this objective fact existed on the subjective mental plane. It still existed in a powerful anchoring manner. This was especially true when Luo Nen temporarily abandoned the virtual brain system to explore the mysteries of the turbid flow of the human heart. This influence was even more direct. In this sense, Luo Nen had taken the initiative to step into the domain of the abyssal sun disk. He went to observe and learn the rules and laws that affected the control of emotions and desires. Since that was the case, there was nothing more to say. Luo Nan's subtle state of mind was like a drop of water thrown into the sun. It evaporated without a trace in an instant. Correspondingly, he calmly accepted the heat that came from the abyss sun wheel. He went a step further to experience the vague laws behind the heat. It was at this moment that a great sun leapt out of the boundless turbid ocean, radiating scorching light and heat, as well as even more penetrative and even destructive power to every level of the turbid ocean in the human heart. Some emotions and desires were instantly vaporized. Some were blown into pieces and lost all meaning on all levels. However, there were still some that, under the bombardment of stimulating energy, revealed information that was previously hidden even deeper. The turbid currents, which had been chaotic in the first place, became even more chaotic. However, under the powerful blast of the abyss sun wheel, the meaningless and low-level information was almost wiped out. What was left was the marvelous water plants and floating objects. Hiss! Cat Eyes woke up from her nightmare once more. The shadow of the human-faced arachnid was annihilated within the brilliant sun disk. However, the crisscrossing chains became even more twisted and taut. There was even a chain that clutched her neck, dragging her along with the vast and boundless chains and spiderweb into the depths of the turbid current. The spiderweb forcefully churned within the turbid current, entangling countless impurities and trash. Of course, there were some catches that Cat Eyes could not understand. She herself was one of the catches. She had long since been bound to it, unable to escape. And no matter how much Cat Eyes struggled within the turbid flow, no matter how deep she was pulled, the intense light and heat that came from the brilliant sunwheel would always envelop her. It reached far and wide and pervasive. It increased the temperature layer by layer, causing her already extremely fragile willpower to distort, collapse, and boil over together with the impatient emotions at the bottom of her heart. During this process, Cat Eyes felt Luo Nan's gaze. It was not focused on her. Instead, it was focused on all things within the turbid ocean. It was focused on all the distorted and fragmented images and information. Therefore, his gaze was dignified and cold. It blended together with the powerful light of the sun disk, dictating the life and death of all things within the turbid ocean. He was aloof and remote, like a god. Cat Eyes was unfortunate. This was because she understood the source of all unforeseen events more clearly than the ignorant existences around her. Therefore, she was the equivalent of looking directly at a god. She endured an even deeper level of destructive pressure. However, Cat Eyes was fortunate. At the very least, she was within the scope of the rules of this grand system. She was close to a god, possessing a bit of the right to pray or beg. Puff, puff. Cat Eye's breathing was still heavy for a long time after she woke up. It was the same as every time after a nightmare. Her clothes were completely drenched, and the bedsheet beneath her was not able to escape from misfortune. A large amount of heat was lost, and the mental exhaustion was 10 times, 100 times greater. It caused her to hover on the brink of collapse. She wasn't even willing to get up. She just raised her eyelids with great difficulty and looked at the ceiling. Her vision was completely unfocused. Instead, Hiyuain's words from the early hours of the morning echoed in her ears. He is currently probing the world. What he probed out was a storm that stirred the world. That wasn't stirring. It was a calamity. Unknowingly, the angle of the sunlight from the outside world had shifted. It shone through the gap in the curtains and fell on the end of the bed, forming a bright edge of light. It also lightly stuck to her smooth calves, bringing a slight warmth. Cat Eyes instinctively twitched. Her calves shrunk back. She could not help but recall the reality of her nightmare, the memory of being illuminated by the radiant sun. Unfathomable and pervasive. It was easy to find adjectives, but the experience of being penetrated, of being peeled open, of having no privacy from the inside to the outside, of having no cover at all. Even the most basic of self-esteem was unbearable. You bastard who bites the hand that feeds you. Cat Eye's little favorable impression of Luo Nan had only been separated by 2 nights, but it had turned to ashes under the roasting of the sunlight. Of course, she definitely would not keep these words bottled up in her heart. Cat Eyes simply dialed Luo Nan's hexaear number, threw these words over, and hung up in an instant. Luo Nan responded in an instant, taking the initiative to call back. Sister Cat Eyes, are you okay? Even though it was the psychic wave network, there were some things that could not be said too clearly on this public line. Cat Eyes responded snappily, "Don't bother me." Then she hung up. Luo Nan was well behaved. His revenge was basically a success. But why was it that his revenge, which was supposed to be a form of venting, carried with it a wondrous fear, excitement, and even an inflated sense of accomplishment? Bastard! Cat Eyes cursed once more. She pounded the bed, but in the end, she still crawled up. She fiercely pulled the curtains tight, not letting a single bit of light leak through. Only then did she go and freshen up. A hot bath really did help soothe the mind. Cat Eyes at least had the appetite to eat breakfast by the time she came out of the bathroom. She also skimmed through the news in passing. There were no surprises. Aside from 2 or 3 authoritative news platforms that maintained a bit of modesty, the various media apps, forums, and discussion groups of all sizes of the inner world had already been overrun by gossip such as Luo Nan secretly did a paternity test, or became a father at 16. The corner of Cat Eye's lips twitched, but she still did not laugh. Indeed, there was nothing funny about it. This was because Cat Eyes and other women who had a close relationship with Luo Nan were all within the scope of the sputtering attacks. Aside from Cat Eyes, Zhang Yingying and even He Yueyin were caught up in these rumors. They were all spread around, and some of them were even accompanied by specious photos and video materials. Titles such as Master Luo's Harem actually became rampant for a time. Thanks to the genius teacher Luo, Cat Eyes actually had the momentum to become an internet celebrity of the inner world overnight. Go find Her Majesty Empress Wu if you have the guts. With that person's high profile, there was no need to blindly take photos. There were plenty of photos and videos. During this time, Cat Eyes received messages of comfort and ridicule from her circle of friends one after another. She was basically unperturbed by this. From her perspective, if she really had to be tossed around like last night from time to time, then it would be better for her to be killed. She finished eating breakfast, but before she could even tidy up, her ears vibrated slightly. A new message was sent over, and it came from Luo Nan. Cat Eyes received it, and her eyelids twitched. It was a form, and the title was Paternity Relationship Appraisal Opinion. All right, after eliminating the meaningless standard phrases and the long list of gene loci, the final analysis and appraisal results were meaningful. The DNA typing of samples A and B at the 20 STR gene loci tested this time is unable to detect homologous hereditary genes. This does not conform to the laws of Mendelian inheritance. According to the results of the DNA genetic marker typing, it does not support the existence of a blood relationship between sample A and sample B. This was great. All the holes in one's imagination were slapped to death in the blink of an eye. Cat Eyes whistled, but before her voice could fall, the other side had already retracted the message. What came next was an awkward emoticon. I sent it wrong. I should have sent it to my friends and family to prove my innocence. Cat Eyes was stunned. She was really unable to match this awkward emoticon and message with the cold and dignified gaze from last night. Is there really nothing wrong with this fellow? Is there something wrong with me? Her thoughts flowed absent-mindedly. Only after a long while did she reply with a perfunctory, "What a pity." This could be considered her usual attitude of taking pleasure in other people's misfortune. The other side instantly replied with another message, but this time it was a hand-drawn sketch. The center of the image seemed to be that of a woman, but the shadows of the lines were smeared away. All that was left was a faint blurry silhouette. And behind this blurry silhouette, there was a technique of perspective. The depth of the image was realized, and another silhouette was outlined. As for why she noticed it, it was because Luo Nan had deliberately marked this silhouette. It looked like, "You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.